Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Wednesday, January 27th, 2021. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Roosevelt Fellow Mike Konczal on his new book, Freedom from the Market. Also on the program today, the fever is not broken. Republicans in the Senate show their hand in trying to block the impeachment trial. Meanwhile, Biden announces an order of 200 million more vaccine doses, hopefully returning us somewhat to normalcy by the end of the summer. A Trump-appointed Texas judge at least attempts to halt Biden's moratorium on deportations. And the Department of Justice rescinds the zero-tolerance immigration rule that led to immigrant children being kidnapped by the Trump administration. Congresswoman Marjorie Greene is just 12 months out from liking on social media calls for an assassination of our political leaders, specifically Pelosi. Joe Biden reverts to ending federal private prison contracts, starts a moratorium on new federal oil and gas leases. The New York City Pension Fund divests from fossil fuels. That's billions of dollars. Tony Blinken confirmed as our next Secretary of State. And Redditors are destroying hedge funds and making some people very wealthy. Filibuster fight in the Senate just beginning as COVID relief negotiations continue. U.S. announces restoration of relations with Palestinians and resumption of refugee aid, and violent clashes continue between government forces and farmers in India. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Emma is here with me in between her day trading that she's doing on.
I did one. Look, guys, Reddit's saying Nokia is the way to go.
Emma came into the office today and she's like, I checked Reddit this morning. And Nokia, and I'm like, really? Maybe. And then she's now. This is Emma has now purchased the entire set, and
I purchased a very small amount of Nokia stock, but like it's taking all of my willpower not to just refresh.
We will. We're going to have somebody on in the next couple of days, probably next week, is to explain what's happened. But the long and short of it is, some people on the social media. I mean, I don't know if everybody knows what Reddit is, but it is. I think most people do. It is a like a old timey internet bulletin board type of situation, yes. A little bit. And there are in an investment group, they somehow figured out, and maybe this is public knowledge. I'm not quite sure, that there had been hedge funds which had gone short on specific companies. In one instance, it was GameStop. In other words, placing bets that some period down the line, the value of that stock was going to be less than it is now. They make an agreement contract to buy it at a certain price that they perceive will be less than it is at, or I should say that they're going to deliver them, I should say, at a higher price than they can get it between now and then.
Yeah.
And some Redditors went in and started buying the stock, drove the price of the stock up, which got other people on board, which drove it up even further. And these hedge funders ended up losing a considerable amount of money because they had to bow out, essentially, of their short positions.
And I think the
company.
shorts expire on Friday. I was just looking that up. So they have to then buy the GME stock in order to
fulfill the promises they made to deliver them at a lower price.
Right, because for their investors. And so that means that if you bought a significant amount of the GameStop stock, then you're going to get bailed out by that hedge fund that you kind of looted. So it's
there you go.
Incredible. It's nice to see regular people kind of taking this massive casino back. I'm sure there will be laws that preclude this in the future, but this is what people on Wall Street have been doing to regular people on a daily basis, and now it's just been democratized because of the internet. So sure, getting while you can, I guess.
Emma will be putting out her stock tips every morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Absolutely
on her Twitter
not.
feed.
So
in addition to the sports show.
Exactly. Emma's going to be very busy these days. Impeachment, as we said, the article of impeachment was delivered the other day from the House to the Senate. And yesterday, Rand Paul brought a motion to the floor to require a vote on whether or not the impeachment trial is constitutional in and of itself. And here he is delivering that.
This impeachment is nothing more than a partisan exercise designed to further divide the country. Democrats claim to want to unify the country, but impeaching a former president, a private citizen, is the antithesis of unity. Democrats brazenly appointing a pro-impeachment Democrat to preside over the trial is not fair or impartial, and hardly encourages any kind of unity in our country. No, unity is the opposite of this travesty we are about to witness. If we are about to try to impeach a president, where is the Chief Justice? If the accused is no longer president, where is the constitutional power to impeach him? Private citizens don't get impeached. Impeachment is for removal from office, and the accused here has already left office. Hyper-partisan Democrats are about to drag our great country down into the gutter of rancor and vitriol, the likes of which has never been seen in our nation's history.
Pause it for
Instead of doing that,
I don't know where Senator Paul was during the past 4 years when we talk about rancor and vitriol, but
he missed that part.
Someone should probably let him know what's been going on in the country. And also what led us to this point. But let's hear a little bit more from him.
Nation's work with their new majorities in the House, the Senate, and the executive branch, Democrats are wasting the nation's time on a partisan vendetta against a man no longer in office. It's almost as if they have no ability to exist except in opposition to Donald Trump. Without him as their boogeyman, they might have to legislate and to actually convince Americans that their policy prescriptions are the right ones. Democrats are about to do something no self-respecting senator has ever stooped to. Democrats are insisting the election is actually not over, and so they insist on regurgitating the bitterness of the election.
Okay, pause it. That is such an obvious straw man. Not one Democratic senator is insisting that the election is not over. The only people who...
Well, the Democrats won the election.
Yeah, the only people who insisted that the election wasn't over, that there was a chance that it could be changed, were the Republicans. They were the ones litigating the election for weeks and weeks and weeks. And you know what it led to? It led to millions upon millions of Americans believing that the election was not over. And what did that cause? The storming of the Capitol building where 5 people died. This party is talking about rehashing things. They did hearings for years on Benghazi when 4 people died. And all Democrats want to do is hold this guy accountable. It's not just about removal from office. That's ridiculous. If you commit a crime in Nebraska, you can still get tried for that crime. You can have to go back there. Just because he's left the office doesn't mean that he can't be held accountable for his crimes. It's ridiculous. Straw man after straw man. And the way he says it with such confidence is so infuriating.
It is. It's sort of shocking. I mean, it's clear what's going on here when you can see what happened to the 11 Republicans in the House that voted for impeachment. They are all now concerned that they're going to be primaried. Mitch
or
McConnell,
get death threats.
Well, yeah. Mitch McConnell, put up a trial balloon in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago, saying that he was happy about impeachment. Now it turns out that once that trial balloon starts to sink, he gets the sense that maybe the Republicans are not in the best position to throw off their base. And then this story that was about Mike Pence, who Business Insider reported that former Vice President Mike Pence don't have any permanent residence and that they're supposedly moving from place to place. At one point in the report, it implied that the Pences are in a precarious position and that they are a little bit concerned about staying in D.C. because, of course, we know that this insurrection, one of the highlights of it, involved people running through the Capitol looking to either, they were saying they were looking to hang Mike Pence, and they had built a gallows. So you literally have their former vice president trying to at least obscure where that he's living, ostensibly afraid of what is out there in terms of the Republican voting base. And you've got Rand Paul pretending that everything is just fine and we should just let bygones be bygones. It really is stunning. But that is your modern Republican Party. The fever, I think, seems to be still raging. We got to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk to Mike Konczal. He is a director at the Roosevelt Institute. He's written a fantastic book, Freedom from the Market, America's Fight to Liberate Itself from the Grip of the Invisible Hand. We'll be back in just a moment with that. In the meantime, today's program, sponsored in part by Brooklinen. I cannot tell you, I literally received 4 pillowcases yesterday from Brooklinen. Yes, that I had ordered.
I love Brooklyn, and I have them for my everyday sheets.
They are, what do you mean your everyday sheets?
I don't know.
Do you have special occasion sheets?
No, I don't have special occasion sheets. I live in a studio, so I have backup sheets, like if I'm behind on laundry, and they're terrible, and I don't like using them.
I see what you're saying.
Because they're not Brooklyn.
Okay,
right.
I understand what you're saying now. Yes. Folks, life is too short to sleep on anything less than really nice sheets, and Brooklinen has them. It was started by Rich and Vicky, who tried to find beautiful home essentials that didn't cost an arm and a leg, and they couldn't. So they started their own company, Brooklinen. It's the first to direct-to-consumer bedding company. I will tell you right now, Brooklinen sheets, Brooklinen comforter, Brooklinen bath mat. Is that what you call that? Like a bath rug?
Yeah.
Buy a Brooklinen towels. And every single one of those products I love. For me, they give you 2 options on the sheets. They have... I can't remember. It's percale, maybe? Is that what they call it? I can't pronounce it. It's the cool, crisp cotton ones. And then they have the other ones that are like sort of more, softer. but I don't like that.
Silkier.
Yeah, no, I don't like that.
They're all soft. Is the point?
They're all soft, but I don't know. I haven't tried the other ones, but I like the cool, crisp ones, the cottony ones, and they look great. I am very partial to the stripes. That's what I've been going for, although I did get a couple of sort of the longer king-size pillow, what do you call it, pillowcases, because, I want, I mix it up a little bit. Solid stripes, yeah.
Yeah.
What do you do? I love these sheets, honestly. I've been using them now for, I guess, like 3 or 4 years. And it's time for you to do something nice for yourself in 2021. Help you do that? Brooklinen has a special offer. Go to brooklinen.com, use promo code MAJORITY. You get $25 off when you spend $100 or more, plus free shipping. That's Brooklinen, BROOKLINEN.com. Enter promo code MAJORITY, get $25 off when you spend $100 or more, plus free shipping. Brooklinen.com. Use the promo code MAJORITY at checkout. Also, folks, these days, I know that I personally, I started trying to take vitamins on a regular basis probably 5 or 6 years ago. These days, I'm a lot more vigilant about it. But one of the great things about Ritual multivitamins is that you can take them without food because they're time released. They have a delayed release capsules, and they're designed to dissolve later, so in less sensitive areas of the stomach, I guess. So you can take them without food.
Oh, nice.
And for me, my biggest problem has always been I always forget. And I tried to do it like in the morning. I tried to make a ritual out of taking the Ritual, but I forget. So when I get home, I can eat them. I can take them without eating food. Ritual also has a visible supply chain that they provide for you, so you know where your nutrients come from. They're available for women, for men, and for teens. They're scientifically developed to help support different life stages. And the best thing about Ritual, your multivitamins, they're delivered to your door every month with free shipping. So you can start, you can snooze if you want, or you can cancel your subscription at any time. If you don't love Ritual in your first month, they will refund your first order. And the beauty of Ritual is that there's no sugar, there's no GMOs, there's no synthetic fillers, there's no artificial colorants, no animal byproducts that you find in normal multivitamins. It's clean, it's vegan friendly, and it is made with key nutrients that your body can actually use to fill the gaps in your diet. That's what Ritual is all about. You deserve to know what's in your multivitamin. That's why Ritual is offering my listeners 10% off during your first 3 months. Visit ritual.com/majority to start your Ritual today. That's ritual.com/majority. Just a reminder, this program relies on your support. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you not only get the free show without commercials, you get extra content in the fun half. And just a reminder as well, this program replays on the Choice channel on the Peacock app, 5 p.m. and 10 p.m. every day. You can check us out there. A little bit of upgraded graphics by the time we get on to
and you can see us on your television, maybe. Right?
Yes, indeed. Or you can watch it on your app, or app on your phone. But yes,
you can see how secretly bad I am at doing my makeup, right?
And how unsecretly bad I am at not using it at all. I'd like to welcome to the program, or back to the program, one of my all-time favorite guests, who I am so pleased now has finished his book, so he's going to be more available on a regular basis. Mike Konczal, he's a director from the Roosevelt Institute, and he is now the author of Freedom from the Market, America's Fight to Liberate Itself from the Grip of the Invisible Hand. Mike, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me back on.
So, all right, let's start with this. I mean, you've created a history, or I should say, you've written a history to that is in some ways a reminder, and to make it clear to people where we have been as a country in relationship to the market, that I think has been somewhat obscured over the years, and I imagine that's where you do too. But let's start with this idea of I want to start off just first with, if I could, give us a sense of what of where we started, or I should say, what is this idea of market freedom? I mean, where did this develop from?
So the idea of market freedom, by that you mean the more conservative ideology, the idea that so the kind of market fundamentalism, the idea that freedom should be like a market and markets are freedom, I think has always kind of been in parts in the country, but has really taken hold in the last 30 to 40 years. There's a lot of reasons for that. We can kind of go through some of them. A general shift to the right on economics in particular is really what the book really wants to emphasize, that wasn't just a shift about saying that markets are better at this or that, which has often been a very bad bet, but that markets themselves should be thought of as like the highest form of civic participation. That markets have really come in to replace things like democratic accountability, public goods, public programs, in that this wasn't just about people trying to denigrate the public or privatize things or make a quick buck, though that's obviously very animating throughout all of it, but that people on the right and increasingly in the center left during this time period were really caught up with the romanticism of the idea that markets are the place where we are most free, where we're able to express ourselves. But markets are fundamentally a domain of inequality. They're a domain of winners and losers, and making sure that people can't get things unless they can pay for them or someone wants to sell things to them. And also in the workplace is a profound state of unfreedom. And those arguments have been with us for centuries. And, a decade ago, when I started to really think about this, I was just realizing what a lack of argument we were dealing with. And I really wanted to recover this history and put it in one place so people could engage it.
Can we start with, and I want to sort of get these sort of broader themes out of the way so that we can go through these examples, some of these key examples that you give throughout American history, of where we had a different relationship to the market and what it the benefits that it provided. But give us an understanding of what neoliberalism is. I mean, we hear this term bandied about quite a bit, and often I think it's misused in some respects. But will you outline for us neoliberalism? And there's two elements to it, I think, that you how you would define it, and so that people can get a better understanding of what this concept is.
Sure. So neoliberalism is a movement by intellectuals and political actors to reduce the ability of democracy to check the market through affirmative state programs. And it's the era in which they were successful in the last 30, 40 years, the stage of capitalism that it produced. That's a kind of clinical definition. The term itself, it just gets really weird in the US context, because here, just as background, here in the United States, liberal tends to mean like Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal and big government programs, where in Europe and elsewhere it tends to mean more libertarian. So new libertarianism, or a new wave of libertarian thought about the economy, might make a little bit more sense to what it's trying to describe. And the book has two chapters on this in the last 30 or 40 years. And I think there's a lot of debate about the term. I think it's very helpful, but sometimes can get a little over-prescribed. I think there's two really important takeaways. One is that it is an affirmative project to remake the government to be more friendly and supportive to markets and to owners and bosses. I think there's a kind of commonplace thing by the right, and sometimes on the left too, that's like the thing is about getting government out of the way, or small government, or limited government, or but that's not actually what's happening. And in the chapter I go through, I talk about some of the public parts of the economy, the public corporation, the public domain, and the public utility, and how there was a real aggressive assault by conservative intellectuals over the last 30 or 40 years, with center-left people helping them out throughout many of these decades, and stripping the publicness out of each of those, and in light of a theory of how the government and the market should work, that a public domain was privatized in increasing amounts and the public corporation was meant to just serve shareholders. And they are very aggressive about using the state in the process of that. That's what's new about it. And we see it, tax laws and global trade agreements and all kinds of things that are meant to limit democracy. The other half of the thing that's really important is that, and I talk about this with public colleges and student debt. People forget that colleges were free for centuries, or nearly free. And, just going through that in the book, I think is a good political education. But the funding was privatized to individuals in the form of student loans. And that wasn't just solely about having this or that funding mechanism. It was meant to tell people that they should have a certain kind of expectation from their government. So the second part is that it's about creating a certain kind of citizen that is meant to only act with markets, with the state backing the markets. This can get kind of technical or kind of abstract, but I think we see it with student loans where it's like, it's not about education being free or education being something that should be available to people who want it. It's about an investment you make in yourself, and you should own the risks and rewards of that. And that's just fundamentally a different kind of citizenship than we've had in centuries past.
I think this is really important to emphasize the notion that because this neoliberalism, which essentially comes out of Mount Pelerin, right, in the wake of World War II, and this idea that the state exists to support the market, because this concept, to understand this concept, takes us to sort of the fundamental concept and a recognition by libertarians that markets are constructed, right? And can we talk about that markets and that property, and maybe we can go back to the Homestead Act where which you write about, that property is constructed. What does that mean?
Absolutely. So your house, like if you own a house, you don't own, you think that you own the house, the physical building, but you don't really. The house doesn't really care about whether or not you own it or not. Sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. What it really is a means of managing relationships between people, that you own your house in the sense that you can keep people from going onto it. And if they try to sleep in your front lawn or walk into your house, you can call on the state to back that up. You can sell off parts of those rights. You can rent out the basement, and you can rent out the basement in such a way that they can't paint the walls. And there are ways to slice up those property rights, but what you're slicing up is a relationship between people. And so one thing, I talk about the Homestead Act, which is obviously a really important part of American history, and it's very controversial, obviously, because it's built on settler colonialism. But one thing it makes very obvious, and the people at the time are very clear about, is that the property that they're arguing about is created by the state. People don't create land. They can only keep people on it or off of it through various parts, through the enforcement of the state. And so it's very interesting to watch that era of free labor, free soil. Early Republicans, the 1850s and 1860s, talk about small-scale property ownership and land as being essential to good citizenship and keeping people free from the market dependency of wage labor. Those insights in that idea that wherever there's a market, there's a state creating the terms for it, ensuring that contracts can be negotiated and executed, moving actual property and profits across locations and across territories. All these things are government enforced. The government is always creating the market. What people like Milton Friedman and Frederick Hayek started to do in the 1940s and 50s is really think, in response to the New Deal, which was a huge shock for them, in response to social democratic movements in the West, not just communism, they started to think, well, we need a program that has a theory of what the state should do. We can't just say that we shouldn't have a state because that's an anachronistic thing after the Great Depression, but we do need a state that would work to limit democracy and check its ability to have markets and have market actors profit and do what they want to do with their property, even though that property is still a set of relationships among people in relation to the economy as a whole. So it's once you read them, it seems very clear that that's what they're doing, but it's no less government action. And so when libertarians say that they're against the government, they sort of don't mean it, or at least they're a little bit confused as to what they're up to.
Right. I mean, the fact is that a property right, there's a property right cannot exist without a government to enforce that property right. I mean, it's really the government's enforcement that establishes that right in many respects.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially that's even more like, so one reason I want to spend a lot of time with land and the Homestead Act, but because it's just an interesting history, and it's a very different way of talking about the economy than we're used to out here, is that you set that with land and it makes a lot of sense. And that's even more relevant out here in the 21st century when we talk about things like corporations, which aren't a real thing. They're a legal entity, they're a legal fiction that hangs over buildings and work processes and things, ideas and intellectual property, money, which itself is backed by the government. The government can create however much it wants in a country like the United States. And you look at historical things that try to check that, whether it's the gold standard or the neoliberalism we live under now, where they actually try to force it so that only private actors, private profit-seeking actors are the ones who can determine the extent of these relationships.
And tell us a little bit more just from a practical standpoint of the Homestead Act, so that people do get a sense of like what it means and what it represented at that time, as opposed to that is different from the way that we perceive these things today.
So it was a time, the Homestead Act gave 160 acres of land to anyone who was willing to settle it, anyone who was interested in becoming a citizen after the Civil War, including freed people. And it was, 160 acres, you got it free. You had to be able to get to it. And it transferred a size of land, approximately the size of Texas and California combined, to settlers. This was in contrast to the frontier. And I want to be clear that obviously it's built on the taking of land from Native American indigenous people. But the alternative was the extension of the slave power to the West. And this was really the fight in the 1850s, or giving it solely to resource extraction and corporations. And, at this time, this is pre-industrialization, but wage labor is becoming more and more common, and people are reacting to it as a state of unfreedom. They don't like having bosses. They don't like having their working hours controlled. And so many people, like Horace Greeley and a lot of the early Republican Party members, argued that if you could give people land like this, that they could maintain their self-sufficiency. There would be markets. There would be, like, people could make crops to sell or to trade, but they wouldn't be dependent on waged labor in the market for their survival. And it's a pretty profound vision of freedom, and people keep coming back to it. It's also a different way of talking about wealth. Now we talk about wealth as this almost ethereal thing, or this thing that has like a deservedness quality to it in a lot of common conversations. Where here they understood that the wealth was being created through state action. It was just who was going to benefit how, and what kind of citizenry would it produce. And though it ultimately could not overcome industrialization, and notably the Southern Homestead Act, which I go into, could not overcome white supremacy and terrorist violence in the South during Reconstruction, it's still a powerful vision that I think has resonance out here in the 21st century.
I mean, and to a certain extent, that's the story of much of your book, isn't it? I mean, it's like these were visions, alternate visions of what America could be, that there are very powerful forces that have a great interest in making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of them are even more on the mark. So when I went into the 8-hour workday, free time is the second chapter, the arguments are just very powerful across the 19th century. The first probable general strike in the United States was in 1835 in Philadelphia for a 10-hour workday. And the language the workers were deploying in pamphlets and in written articles just are really amazing out here in the 21st century. They're arguing that they, as people who fought in the revolution or are children of the revolution, have natural rights to freedom and their own free time, and that no boss can have dominion over that. And it's a language of natural rights, which we wouldn't really use out here the same way, but just the idea that there's something about the workplace that is fundamentally anti-democratic and anti-freedom in the sense of it's encased with arbitrary domination. I think it's very compelling out here when we have people who work way too many hours to just get out of poverty, or can't work enough hours because there's not full employment, or importantly, for many places in service sector, they don't have control over their hours. They don't even know what their hours might be at the beginning of the week. And without that, you can't have communities, you can't have civil society, you can't have time with your family and friends. And I like that argument just resonates so clearly out here in 2021. I think kind of just demonstrating that people have been fighting battles literally for 2 centuries plus on how to control their working hours. I hope gives some ammunition and hope to people fighting those tough battles out here.
I want to get into the into Social Security and as well as into Medicare. But maybe this is a good time just sort of like to just take a slight tangent for a second and talk about you go over 5 reasons for that that freedom from markets are essential to being free, and maybe we should just touch on that. Brought up by that concept. I mean, I think you started the book with a quote from the 10-hour. For the protests, and it's just sort of shocking to see people talk about that, which is about the relationship with work as being that I think many of us today perceive like, oh well, that's maybe how we evolved to that concept, as opposed to that's from 150 years ago or so. So I mean, give us those 5 reasons for freedom from markets are essential to being free. Like, what does it mean to be free? I guess we can start with.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the key ones is freedom just requires being free from arbitrary domination. And I think one of the key things is the 5th one in the 5, but is, we talk about whether or not the government makes people more or less free, whether or not there's restrictions on speech or movement or political activity. And we understand that framework really well for saying this country is more or less free. But the market is just as much a government creation as secret police or, a system of mass incarceration or other kinds of limitations. And given that the market is fundamentally bound up with limiting people's activities and managing activities among people, I think it's important to understand it as a component of freedom. So just like as we said earlier, there's no way to say like, okay, the government's over here and the market's over there, and then the government's the only thing that can really restrict your freedom. The market's way over here, or way over in some other place. It's the same activity. And so it's important to put the government's creation and execution economy under the same scrutiny we would put for any other things we consider about freedom, whether it's religion or privacy or so on and so forth. In practice, freedom requires being free from the arbitrary domination of others, the Republican theory of like a philosophical Republican theory of freedom. And, in the workplace, in our communities, like we are subject to the decisions of others, whether they're our bosses, whether they're major platforms that surveil us online, whether or not they're people who may or may not pay for our healthcare, even though we have insurance. Like they have the ability to subject us to unfreedom in a way that is profound and has deep implications. Other reasons I go through is one is that
Let me just stop you there, because the counter argument to that we would hear would be, well, you've made that decision of your own free will. You have decided to forego that level of control over yourself and subject yourself to the arbitrary whim of your boss, as it were, because you're getting money in return. Why don't I have the freedom to give that up? I mean, what dictates, how does that make that dynamic unfree in some way?
Sure. So one is that you have to work to survive under capitalism. So that absolutely introduces another element into it, right? So you need money to survive in capitalism. You need money. You are dependent on the labor market unless you happen to be rich separately. And as such, in order to survive, there's always someone who, the boss who determines whether or not you have access to that wage, is fundamentally in a position to determine quite a bit of your life outcome. So that's one entry point.
This may seem like sort of obvious to people, I think, who deal with this on a daily issue, but I think for a lot of Americans, we don't realize that is a choice that has been made. Not necessarily by all of us. It's a choice that we have been born into on some level. And it's also a choice that we make to perpetuate that, because we have societies all around us in the world where those survival, and this is obviously what you write about here, is that those necessities that you need to live, let's say housing and food and healthcare, there are places where you don't need to work to have those, and you can enter into that agreement to give up control of yourself to your boss without that sort of coercion of not having the necessities available to you.
Exactly. The market relations build the coercion right into the labor contract. And as such, there's places where you can have better or worse relationships between workers and bosses. And let's be clear, like throughout our history, we've had, even in nominally free market, like free labor contracts, like huge abusive, feudal relationships. The book talks a little bit about this, about how, for a long period of time, especially before the Wagner Act and the New Deal, labor contracts were kind of feudal. The worker absorbed all the responsibility. They ended up disabled, as a large number of people did in the early 20th century. If there was any cost, the workers had to bear them. They couldn't be hired away. They couldn't leave their job early. It kind of evolved out of almost master serf relationships from like feudal era. And like there's a way to introduce democracy into that relationship that I think is essential for freedom. And if you walk down the things like health, for instance, like us being healthy is in part based on how we're born. It's part based on choices we make, but it's also in part based on the environments we're in, the access to information we have, and the resources we have. And we talk a lot about this in the book when the creation of the idea of social insurance is that there's a level of security against so we know, and if we're relying on capitalism for wage labor, we also know that there are periods when we can't secure that. We're too young, we become disabled, we become sick, we become too old. Or we're engaged in caregiving labor, which isn't compensated under capitalism. There's a way to insure against that in the literal sense of insurance that the government is the best at carrying out in terms of its scale and efficiency and making sure that everyone has access to it. And the book covers a little bit about how that becomes a predeterminant of freedom, that your ability to be secure in those periods when you're unable to work is reflected through the government's ability to provide that income insurance at scale and in a way that ensures everyone's included.
So we talk about that sort of notion of what it would take to not allow the market to dominate us. And I do want to get to some of these, like the daycare example that you provide. But let's also, this is a good time, I think, to define capitalism, because in this era there is, I think, there is particularly, I think, a large extent because Bernie Sanders has been in our loomed so large in our politics for 2 cycles now. There's been a sort of a focus on the definition of socialism, but I'd like you to define capitalism. Like where does, like, what constitutes capitalism in your mind, and to what extent is that sort of can capitalism exist if you have markets that are not subsuming so much of our freedom?
Sure. So yeah, it's been funny how there's been all these very large fights, often within the left, about what is socialism. Like, is Bernie Sanders socialism? Is Sweden socialist? And not enough about like what's capitalism. And it's like, what is actually capitalism? It was part of the fight over the 1619 Project, is when they hinted that we should understand slavery as a proto-capitalist system because it had profits and financial instruments and certain kinds of record keeping. And people thought about that, but it's also like, okay, but like, what is actually capitalism? I think sometimes people use this kind of functional, like, well, if there's banks and if there's corporations and if there's private, like profit seeking, which I don't think is ultimately gets to it. There's a couple different definitions. The one the book really engages with, and the one that I think is really important for this story, is something coined, I go off by historian Ellen Wood's argument about market dependence. That capitalism is where we are dependent on the market for the allocation of all goods in society. And you can take that to extremes, but basically, to the extent that you are able to survive and thrive, it depends on the ability of market actors to allow it, or market relationships to carry it out. The dependency kind of reverses the idea of market freedom, that markets like are a cool place to thrive, because it's like, well, it's also a place where if you can't work, you're in a lot of trouble, or if you are sick and have a pre-existing condition without regulations, like you are in trouble. So I like that relationship, that it's ultimately means that the market is the thing that is determining the allocation of all the key goods in our society. And it also provides a way in which democracy is a check on that. So you can have markets existed before capitalism, and markets will exist in whatever happens 500 years from now when something else is in place other than capitalism, whatever that might be. And trading for goods and profits, but the dependence of markets is and also I'd really emphasize almost the moral determinant of who should get what, not just the allocative reality. I think that is, one is, I think, a pretty accurate definition that helps us get a sense of the scope of capitalism. And also, I think what people are most resistant against. You always see these things about like, how can you be a socialist if you have an iPhone and that stuff like that? And it's like, well, no, like there are things that markets are very good at getting to people, like technological advances, but there are things it's quite terrible at, like care labor and retirement security and healthcare and control over your hours. And it allows people to engage in a critical discourse that doesn't get tripped up in like whether or not you should have like a fancy gadget or something.
Is that, I mean, from your perspective, is it more helpful to define capitalism versus, let's say, socialism? Or I mean, do we have a is there like a 51%, 49%, and it's that binary, and we cross some threshold and we're not capitalists, or I mean, like. That it starts getting very nebulous in there. I mean, when we talk about, like you say, the Scandinavian countries or European, different European countries. I mean, or are we just on some type of continuum, or is there even like a is the one continuum just too narrow of a plane?
I think there's a continuum in many different directions, both in terms of in which ways the markets are in our lives. I think of it, continuum's correct in this sense, but I like the idea of a compass. Are we getting closer or further away from something? And if we're getting closer to market dependency and the rule of market logic, is that a good direction to go in this space? And, you can see it even in the last year. You look at what's happened to workers in California, where even the proto labor conditions that adhere to people, they are now more dependent because of these contingent worker clauses and things like that have passed. That is, I mean, it's bad in the context that it makes them even more dependent on the market for what they secure, even things like a minimum wage or various forms of anti-fissuring. You look at campaign finance, which is like democracy is even more dependent on market actors and market logic. And you suddenly start to see it in a lot of different ways. And I think it's the way it shows up across spheres, I think, helps us understand a little bit better what we're trying to get away from.
Okay. All right. So tell us the example of daycare in World War II, because I really want to get to this into Medicare, or I should say Medicaid, and what it did in terms of like integrating the Southern hospitals. But
yeah. So the story I knew a little bit about it. It was so fascinating to dig into. Essentially, that we mobilized and conscripted so many men during World War II, and we were at such a high pressure economy. There was so much work that needed to be done, particularly in factories, that women were sent into the workforce very rapidly. And women had always been increasing their workforce participation across the 20th century, but here, going into government work and manufacturing and industrial work was sectors that they generally had not been working previously. And those were, high income, especially at the time, very high income, but many had children and no one to watch them. And so as part of the mobilization, the government dumped a bunch of money into daycares for workers in government, in wartime facilities that they essentially created them within a year. It's crazy to see the scale of it. Hundreds of thousands of kids in good daycares within a year and a half plus, by the time it was like fully up and running. And people had really good impressions of them, like the surveys were bad. Some people were resistant to the idea of using them, but then once they used them, they enjoyed them and benefited from them. A big component of it that I thought was really telling, very relevant for our debates right out here in 2021, is up until that point, daycare had essentially been a form of stigmatized charity. They wouldn't even think of it as stigmatized, or they would think of it as a good thing. That like their job in providing daycare for women who needed them was that they were either directly social workers or doing social worker-like activity, where the idea was like to make sure moms were behaving well and keeping case files and doing interviews and essentially acting as oppositional agents to the family structure. Where here in World War II, the military had no interest in being social workers. They wanted bombers and they wanted And so they were like, if you can show up and work, we will absolutely give you daycare. We don't want to means test this. We don't want to keep records on you. And that was a transformative policy for the people who were able to, the women who were able to use it. Because it just removed the stigma and just showed how well a program can work when they wanted to. There was also a lot of opposition to it, ranging from social workers to the Catholic Church, to conservatives, to a lot of moderates. And so they fought to keep them going, and ended up keeping them going for a few years, in some places a little bit longer, notably in California. And the fight is a very interesting one, full of all kinds of arguments about how daycares allowed women to have the freedom of choice into how to structure their families the way they wanted. And it's a really cool history that's still very relevant, sadly, out here.
Why is it that we can only provide something like that if, it is to pay for bombing people or fighting people? I mean, right?
I mean, like, we do things right when we want to. So like, the total warness broke, so there you have the stigma around poverty and, the stigma around gender relationships, right? So like the war required being flexible on patriarchy, and the war effort required being flexible on having large programs that could continue themselves if they wanted. And I think it's only like a little bit like the CARES Act in the pandemic, where you were paying people over 100% unemployment insurance replacement rates. Crazy times allow for policies to break through, and then it's a question whether or not you can continue them or find the coalition to build on them.
Talk about this element of Medicare funding to desegregate Southern hospitals. So this is a fascinating, this dynamic between providing this type of semi-universal, I guess, program, and its implications, not just in terms of economics, but race, or I think it shows that dynamic between the two.
Yeah, absolutely. So President Truman tried to get single payer healthcare, and it was defeated. And one of the things the government did was just dump a bunch of money into hospital construction. So you had these federally funded hospitals all across the South to make up for disinvestment in healthcare during the Great Depression, notably, and also the war. And those federally funded private hospitals remained desegregated until 1965. This is a decade plus after Brown, which should have required federally funded institutions to desegregate. It was a year after the Civil Rights Act, which prohibited, by definition, but in one of the titles, segregated facilities in public accommodations and also things that receive federal funding. Yet Southern hospitals remained segregated. They just refused in many cases, or more importantly, they were dragging out the process and kind of just lying and saying that they were doing stuff that they weren't. And it wasn't until the issue of Medicare funding, which was going to redefine the funding landscape for hospitals in the United States, came into being, that it was actually in a position to force change. Something a lot of legal scholars know that I did not actually know until I researched the book was that Brown versus Board of Education didn't actually desegregate many schools in the South. Because the courts are very good at upholding privilege and power, but they're really bad at dismantling it. They don't control funding. They rely on elite actors to carry out their work. There's a great book called The Hollow Hope about this. And so your ability to rely on the courts to dismantle things like white supremacy is actually going to be kind of limited. They're really good at reinforcing it, but they're really bad at limiting it. It wasn't until the Civil Rights Act and the Civil Rights Movement that you could really have mechanisms that included administrative capacity and money to force change and like punitive penalties. And so what the people who stood up Medicare did, in addition to just getting it launched in a year, which is totally crazy if you live through the 2010s, they literally got Medicare up and running within 1 year. Also, one nice thing about universal programs, they mailed everyone basically a punch card saying, do you want this? Tell us, confirm you live here. Do you want Part B? You have one choice, yes or no, it's $3. And then you got Medicare. As opposed to a website that needs to coordinate 100,000 different things. So that's a very interesting thing. But more importantly for this story is that the people who stood up the civil rights portion of Medicare were people, veteran fighters of the civil rights battle, who worked with community activists and Black medical professionals to create a network of people who went out and ensured that hospitals were desegregated. And the ones that didn't were threatened with funding and virtually all of them before and then all of them after backed down. And Medicare, the threat of not getting Medicare funding forced desegregation. And it happened in a very quick pace. And it happened with the certainty that you would not have gotten through random lawsuits or just trying to wait it out or public pressure. The ability of the government to provide a program really does can, if it wants, ensure that everyone has access to it.
It's fascinating to me because as you talk about the power of affirmative action by the government into the market and its ability to sort of change, which would seem like a bank shot, right? I mean, it's one thing to say, like, you're going to take, we have an opportunity for you to take Medicare patients. And it's another to say that we're going to change your exclusion of a certain group of people through Medicare payments. There's this dynamic of, like, the invisible hand is really not invisible as much as it is obscured, right? And it's just it is hiding what its agenda is, whereas the government is at least we're explicit about what that agenda is. We can see what it is, and theoretically, at its best, it is democratically determined on some level.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of the most pernicious things about Jim Crow's ways that intermingled civil society and white civil society and private actors and public profit-seeking actors and the government as the background, right? So, like, all these hospitals in the South were public-private partnerships, though not legally. They were receiving public money in the sense that they were getting employer-provided health care, which is a tax expenditure, that they were receiving funding, that they were treated as private employers to ensure that the federal government could not get in the way through the federal funding component. And the courts took a very slow course with the hospitals. And it's the ability of a public program to cut through that mess of self-reinforcing segregation, I think, is really powerful. And it points to what programs can do now if we want them to. And they could have also designed it to not do that too. They could have just paid it out, or what they were really worried about was them just saying, like, oh, you know what, like, promise us in 5 years you'll get it. And then they, of course, 4.5 years later asked for a waiver. And this was like the real worry. And so there's ways that public programs can also reinforce it if you don't actively make the choice not to.
We just have a minute or two here. And I know that, so much of your work has come out of your experience in the Occupy movement, which now almost, I guess, 10 years ago. Give me a sense of where you think we're headed. I mean, what, like, when with the Biden administration, are there green shoots, as it were, or some indication where you have optimism, where you see, or maybe better phrase, like, what do you think is the most important thing that we're seeing that could lead to sort of making people more aware of this relationship with the market?
That's a really good question. Obviously anyone who's lived through the last 12 years has politically in particular, has a couple thoughts on this. A few things. One is that it seems like there's a lot of movement towards moving faster and bolder and more publicly than simply through private actors. So you look at the big top-offs and direct checks to individuals and unemployment insurance in particular, I think have been very encouraging. I think the fact that you can talk about, you can go back to talking about, like, lowering Medicare age or expanding the public option, or trying to find better ways to leverage Medicaid, are all more publicness programs than solely trying to work through the private actors and the ACA exchanges. And how they'll balance that would be a good question. For me, most important is that in terms of the moment is full employment. I think, we look back at 2009, 2010, the move that was predetermined really to go to austerity. Like, it wasn't just Republicans that forced that one. I think people understood what a big mistake it was on one hand. And then on the second hand, even in 2016, people in that time understood, like, there's a big fight about whether or not 4.5%, 5% was full employment, whether or not the economy had recovered as much as it was going to. In 2016, we should kind of just be okay with that. And, in 2019, unemployment got below 4% for maybe a year or two. I was at 3.5% for 6 months before COVID. that's shocking to people who lived through that period. And I'd always been very bullish that unemployment could get very low, and I was like even shocked by it. So I think the sense that there was a real fumbling about the two most important questions about the scope of the ability of the government to react and how far you could get towards full employment. The fact that both of those were whiffed pretty hard, I think the people really want to make up for that, which I'm encouraged by.
Mike Konczal, the book is Freedom from the Market, America's Fight to Liberate Itself from the Grip of the Invisible Hand. Really fascinating stuff. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, folks, quick break. Be right back. I could have spoken to him for another hour, and there was so much in there. There's so much, so much in there that in that book that I think is a really important read for folks. And his point about this broad elite consensus, not even elite consensus. I think he conceded that he shared in some of that in terms of what the lowest rate of unemployment we could have was without sort of the economy overheating. It's good. I mean, we're going to see that in the way that the Fed reacts to things, and the idea that we can continue to put money into the economy as a government until people are recover from what has been an enormous economic shock. And I think the other thing that he didn't have a chance to talk about was there was a broad elite consensus about the concept of deficits and debt, which I think is also gone by the wayside. All right, that's it for us today. We'll be back with more tomorrow. See you then. And for those of you sticking around, I could have talked to Konczal for another. We'll have him back on soon, but I can't recommend that book more. Really important to both.
I'm excited to read it. I am.
It's important to sort of get these concepts of stuff that show the bounds of what we can do and what we have sustained in real time. But it also, I think, people to understand this relationship with the market. And I love the idea too of sort of getting a sense of what constitutes capitalism, because it's so binary in our conversations that we have in this day and age as to, that there's some massive divide, let's say, between Elizabeth Warren saying that she's a capitalist to her bone, which was obviously sort of like a little bit of a sop.
A little bit.
And Bernie Sanders, saying he's a socialist. I mean, the differences between them are not so dramatic. And I think some socialists would say, well, that's because Bernie Sanders is not actually a socialist and whatnot. Yeah. But the real question is, at least in the context of where we are at this day and age, what constitutes capitalism and what parts about it are problematic? And I think, that notion of having to enter the market with this sort of coercion is a big part of it. It is, and the way that you deal with that is to decommodify some, if not all, of these things that we need to exist. And I
think the conflation of markets with capitalism is unhelpful, I think is a short way of saying that.
Yeah.
The coercion, that goes back to the wage system. I just reading that 1710 diary of the slaver William Byrd II. He wages are something you give to the servants who aren't slaves, right? And that's that system is basically where we're at still these days. And I don't know. I think particularly in the context of what we talked about with Astor Taylor and student loan debt. A lot of these structures of control, they're just more mass and more, than they used to be, but it's the same kind of impulses of power, basically.
Right, and that and we didn't have a chance to get to that with him, but he's got some great. He does some great writing on that dynamic of the difference between the difference in the coercive relationship between having access to university that does not saddle you with debt, vice versa. I mean, we talked about that in sort of slightly other terms, like you say, with Astor Taylor, but so much of it is about the relationship between the players within the market, right? You enter the market and you already have healthcare, and you enter the market and you already have housing. If you enter the market and you already have the option of an education that does not burden you with debt, you enter the market and your children are cared for when you go to work, it changes the relationship between you selling your labor and the person who's purchasing it.
Yeah.
And look, we know, I mean, and this is what the neoliberal project really is about, is on the other side of that ledger, from the people who are buying your labor, government does many things to ease or to add to their bargaining power by providing limited liability in terms of when you enter these markets, either requiring or not requiring certain working conditions that you must provide, maybe providing infrastructure for your business in a way, like, the building the roads for a corporation that is selling a product is the functional equivalent of providing free daycare for a parent who's going in to, negotiate their contract with that company. It's just sort of like, what is that dynamic between those two entities that enter into the market? And it is way out of whack.
I think COVID really revealed a lot of that, with all the concern last summer about, are we paying too much to people in this COVID relief to make them stop going to work, right? That's the fundamental thing we're concerned about.
And increasingly, I am convinced that this is sort of an obscured part of the healthcare debate. That it is, yes, insurance companies stand to make a lot of money, but, I think it was Matt Brunig who pointed out, like, this is not a massive industry. It's like a $30 billion annual industry. It's not a massive industry that it should have this type of power in and of itself. There's also the hospitals and the providers and the doctors. But I'm also convinced that there is a hidden incentive particularly for large corporations, but broadly speaking, that it adds a certain amount of control and power in that negotiation between the worker and the owner, the manager.
When your healthcare is dependent on it.
When your healthcare is dependent upon it, and I think, I think that concept is a little bit obscured in that debate, like that notion of, because it's always mystifying. Like, people are like, well, I don't understand why corporations aren't lining up to have the government pay for health care. And to a certain extent, part of that is because, it may free up folks to be a little bit more, picky and have a little more power in that negotiation. All right. We got to take a break, head into the fun half of the program. We went long today. Just a reminder, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, today on the Nomiki Show.
It is Nomiki's birthday.
It is?
Yes, it is. I just texted her before the show.
Gosh. Wow. Nomiki, happy birthday. I hope she hears that. Today on Nomiki's show, Brendan O'Connor, Jordan Zach Aaron, Simon Narode. Maybe I'm not pronouncing that correct. You can watch her at 3 p.m. on YouTube or on Twitch, twitch.tv, _Nomiki's Nomiki_show. I just like giving that one out. Also, don't forget, check out the Antifada. You can find it on twitch.tv/the Antifada. They're doing like 2 or 3 streams a week now on the Antifada. And you can also find it at patreon.com/the Antifada. Matt.
Yeah, literary hangover, folks. As I mentioned, The Secret Diary of William Byrd II. We did his 1709 entries. Check that out. Interesting stuff there. We also talk about his relation to a descendant or an ancestor of George Washington and Robert E. Lee. You know, how they kind of, as Prager points out, that's an incestuous slave aristocracy there, and we go into a colorful character that those guys descended from. So check that out on any podcast feed you like.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920 is the number. We're going to head into the fun half. We also can IM the show. People ask, how do I IM the show? Well, you pick up the app, majorityapp.com. It's free. You can use it on your iPhone or your Android. And, of course, we sell all of your GPS data to the government.
Obviously. That's how the show makes money.
That's basically what moves us along. A lot of people think like,
the ads, they're just, dressing.
That's just a way to obscure the idea that we are selling all that data. No, in fact, we don't. We don't have one of those DK or PK packages. I don't know what it is, but Kyle has explained it to me. He's very, very sensitive about it. Kyle has like no apps on his phone because of that.
Interesting.
Yeah, he won't.
No, I'm like such a target for targeted ads. I'll like look at,
Well, it's not just targeted ads. They take your GPS data and they'll sell it to the government. They'll sell it to hedge funds who are like, or like holding companies, like we own a mall company. Where should we put a mall? Well, we can look at this data and it's broken down and we can tell like where people, where the key place that people go by every day.
I don't like this.
Yeah, sorry. Well, that's the upside. We just haven't been able to get on the ball with our app to do that. So you can IM the show via the app. Find it at majorityapp.com. And don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. See you in the fun half.
In for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Anarchy. Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danerky.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are...
Psych. Fuck them. Almost has what?
What?
Almost has what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. black African, and the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. It's the fun half, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello.
We got a lot of clips from Tucker Carlson. He's really making a move, right now.
I guess so.
Pole position.
He's got to get in there and be the defining voice of the post-Trump administration. This is pretty stunning, though. I guess the way he's going to do it is by inviting lunatics onto his program. I mean, look, by any definition, Mike Lindell is out of his mind, right? I mean, I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a mad dash to retain the Trump supporter. Like, I think Fox is quite worried.
Well, and they're making up for their quick call, as it were.
Yes. In Arizona, I mean, they fired that guy who made the call.
That's right. They did.
And so now they've got to have the My Pillow guy on to appeal to the Trump fanatics.
They got to show their bona fides.
Yeah.
Here's Mike Lindell, who incidentally was bounced from Twitter. And he was bounced from Twitter because I guess he had repeatedly put up
lies,
fairy tales of the election or whatnot. And here he is joining Tucker Carlson. So as you can see, completely silenced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, was Tulsi Gabbard on before or after Mike Lindell?
I don't know, but my point being that if we can hear you talk on your cable television program, you're probably not silenced. But here you go.
Down all the way. I just couldn't do anything. And they were running my Twitter like they were me. My friends are going, you're not tweeting very much. And when you do, I said, I'm not doing that. So I tried.
Okay, erasing Mike Lindell is the Chiron.
Erasing Mike Lindell. What Lindell is explaining here is that his Twitter was hacked, and by, of course, the Germans, because he revealed the whole thing about the server and the Dominion.
Right.
Dominion, I think, is also, I don't know if they're suing him, but they're suing Rudy Giuliani. This is a bold move by them to hack Lindell's Twitter account while they're in the midst of a suit. I mean, that's bold. But here we go.
They got to build their case.
Down all the way. I just couldn't do anything. And they were running my Twitter like they were me. My friends are going, you're not tweeting very much. And when you do, I said, I'm not doing that. So I tried to take it down, and I got a thing from Germany saying, these are Twitter rules and you cannot do this, take anything down. So they ran my Twitter for about 14 days, 15 days. Then yesterday, they put it back up so I could run it. And I made one tweet, and the tweet was a good letter written by one of my employees because I'm getting attacked about my integrity and stuff. And they took it down 5 minutes later. And then a week ago, they did a Dominion, went on TV and said they were going to go after Mike Lindell. Well, they did. They hired hit groups and bots and trolls, went after all my vendors, all these box stores to cancel me out. This cancer culture. Fake stories coming out to attack my Lindell Recovery Network, which helps addicts across the country. It's just a shame, Tucker, if they can do it to me, believe me, they can do it to anyone out there. But I'm not backing down. We cannot back down out of fear this time. Nobody can. Totally I told these box stores, you guys, these aren't real people. These are trolls and bots. The real people will buy the products and will support you. You can't do this just because they cancel you. Try and cancel culture.
May I ask you one question?
Now, I want to just say, because credit where credit's due, so far they haven't run a single coupon code for my pillow.
That says cancel culture?
I mean, I don't know, but I've never seen Mike Lindell in any context without there being a coupon code for my pillow.
And I'm surprised. Yeah, I mean, you would think Tucker would let him show that image. He clearly contractually obligates for every one of his media appearances of him holding the pillow, right? With the My Pillow logo beneath it.
Exactly.
Tucker was like, that's a bridge too far for me. This is not Newsmax, good sir.
Am I the only one who thinks that, like, if I'm going to have this guy on my national cable television program, I would just say, like, wait a second. I'm sorry. Wait. They controlled your Twitter for 14 days? I'm not clear. Could you repeat that part again? Because I don't get it. Like, they controlled your Twitter for 14 days, and your friend's like, you're not tweeting much.
Dude, tweeting and not remembering what you tweeted, I'm not saying, but that doesn't mean that Germany hacked your Twitter account.
Germany's always involved in the Twitter
also,
thing.
thank God that Jane Krakowski story was completely false. Didn't date her. Nope.
Here is Mike Lindell just going on about why he's been censored, the cancel culture. And you know about this, of course, because it was on a national cable television program just moments after he was canceled.
Of course. This is like ridiculous.
Yeah. Why wouldn't everybody want to know the truth of this country? Just let the truth be told. If there's nothing to hide, let's bring it out so we all can see it. Instead, they're trying to erase Mike Lindell and erase my pillow. Well, I'm not going to be erased. I mean, all my friends that.
Did they put up a coupon?
Put the coupons up. Forget those.
Mentions them.
Close.
Fox was like, we can't explicitly put a coupon code up, but if we mention that there are coupons,
people can do the work.
People can do the work.
Well, they're saying it's a counter boycott to Bed Bath & Beyond about those mailer coupons.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah. Here we go.
They lost their YouTube channels. They lost their Facebook, 2 million followers. One guy has 12 employees. He's gone. His livelihood he built up is just gone. Any business, churches that supported the president, that's a whole other issue. They're being attacked, and they're going to be just, canceled.
No, I've noticed. Mike Lindell, I really appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tucker. Thanks for having me on, and God bless you. Thank you.
Amen. God bless you. Mike Lindell, he sells pillows. Why has he been censored? And by the way, before you say,
we're aware that he sells pillows.
He sells pillows. I mean, why? The idea that he's been, yeah.
He's on your show. He's not been canceled. And the idea where he's like, if this can happen to me, it can happen to anybody. Like, you're a CEO and the president's prominent batshit like screamer on the stump.
I mean, Colin Kaepernick, he plays football and he's been canceled.
Yeah, I know. He wasn't that concerned about that.
And that guy's really been canceled.
Yeah.
Or like pull up the clip from Tucker Carlson, because Tucker Carlson was on MSNBC back in the early aughts. Pull up the clip of Tucker Carlson bemoaning the fact that Phil Donahue got bumped from there because he was anti-war.
Oh, right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, they're telling me in the control room they don't have that.
Okay, did I jump the gun there?
No, I was. I was doing my yeah. I mean, come on, give me a break. Cancel culture like this has been going on forever, and but Phil Donahue didn't have the opportunity to go on a rival network or anywhere else for that matter and say, I just got canceled because I was speaking out against the war.
It's commodified aggrievement. We've talked about this before, and like there is not a more stark example of it than the raving and ranting My Pillow guy who refers to himself in the third person, going on TV and using and advertising his coupon codes to talk about how canceled he is. I mean, that is just the crystallization of the issue right there.
Kaepernick, you talk about like Kaepernick was basically shut out by a monopoly.
I mean, thank God he has that Nike deal, which I think is really, profitable for him, but
stunning.
Yeah.
Carlson has been on a roll. Here's another example of the QAnon thing. Watch the rhetorical trick here he does, right? Where you have news media reporting on how these QAnon lunatics, and I'm sorry, The depth in which these people believe this this stuff is nuts, in my estimation, my opinion. But to the extent that people are have a problem with him, a problem with QAnon believers, it is not. The government is not prosecuting people for believing in QAnon. Here we go.
The real threat is a forbidden idea. It's something called QAnon.
Next, what to do about QAnon and its droves of loyal followers? Is it too little, too late to bring our loved ones back to reality?
Many of those who believe the totally unfounded conspiracies and prophecies of QAnon expected January 20th to be Judgment Day.
As far-right figures and QAnon conspiracy theorists are joined by Trump supporters who believe the election was stolen.
QAnon is better viewed as an on-ramp to various different extremism circles.
How many people in the country have been marinated in these conspiracy theories, QAnon craziness, and it is frightening.
That's CNN. Pause it.
Here we go.
So he just played, I don't know, a half a dozen clips from MSNBC and CNN. Those, just in case you're wondering, are cable news networks. Period. End of story. But continue.
That's not
because
the government?
Well, Tucker is not quite sure.
Tom Friedman thinks this is all pretty frightening. And he's right, but not, as usual, for the reasons he thinks. We're watching a profound change taking place in American society, and it's happening very fast. The stakes could not be higher. There is a clear line between democracy and tyranny, between self-government and dictatorship. And here's what that line is. That line is your conscience. They cannot cross that. Government has every right to tell you what to do. Controlling the behavior of citizens is one of the basic prerogatives of any organized society. It's why we have it. Government can try to prevent you from committing murder or rape or from speeding or jaywalking. That's all allowed. It's legitimate. But no democratic government can ever tell you what to think. Your mind belongs to you. It is yours and yours alone. Once politicians attempt to control what you believe,
there wasn't a single politician in that package he presented. There wasn't a single representative of the government whatsoever. I mean, he is driving this insanity. He's not the only one, but this is a sleight of hand that goes on every single day on his show in one form or another. The government is not outlawing QAnon. The government is not, as far as I know, I imagine there are some politicians who have a problem with QAnon, just like there are some politicians who have a problem with BLM or Colin Kaepernick or whatnot, because they're using political rhetoric. But there is no tyranny against QAnon here from the government.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a conflation of different kinds of elites. And one can inform the other, right? Like the government elites, they often determine a lot of mainstream media talking points just based on them being at the center of power, and the media influences people in government. There's no question about it. But there's a difference there's a difference between feeling like you can't be a part of mainstream culture and believe in an insane thing like QAnon, which should be the reality, and that's why the media is covering it, and being locked away for believing in QAnon, which is not happening. It's not happening. And it's a way for him to give a wink and a nod to the Capitol insurrectionists who didn't just believe in QAnon. They stormed the Capitol and people died.
That's exactly the point, is that he is defending these people. He's doing it. It's a little bit of a bank shot, but that's what he's doing. He is extrapolating. These people are being arrested because he's trying to make it like they're being arrested because they believed in a conspiracy theory, as opposed to went into the Capitol with designs to kill or hang, or even if they just went into like, I'm just going to go on and take a crap on the Senate floor. I'm sorry, that's illegal regardless of who does it.
Yeah, and it's regardless of what you believe. Yeah, it's they could believe whatever they wanted. It's the actions that they took. But then he doesn't get to couch his completely reprehensible politics in lazy 1984 rhetoric where he's trying to claim there's some sort of thought police. No, there's policing based on the actions of the people that had those thoughts. It has nothing to do with what they... Like, how else can he bring it back to the tech companies and make it all about them. Like the one industry he's somewhat interested in calling out their greed for because they're connected to the Democrats.
This is the same hysteria sort of pitch as Jordan Peterson was making about that bill that said, I'm going to be thrown in jail for misgendering somebody.
Yeah, right. What? And like they were also doing this too because now Biden has pronoun options on the government website.
Absolutely.
How dare he?
Infringement upon my masculinity.
1984 much?
Exactly.
Orwell would not be proud of this. He wouldn't recognize this society. Or he would.
So here is Tucker Carlson. And if the news reports that he was having dinner down in Florida where he owns a house are correct, and the news reports that he has built a studio up in Maine where he has a house is correct, and the news reports that he also broadcasts from New York City where he has a house is correct. Here he is, Tucker Swanson McNear Carlson, son of a former U.S. ambassador.
Who just dined with Bush, by the way, talking about Florida.
Exactly. Heir to a fortune. Here he is saying that there is no such thing as privilege.
The federal government is, above all, an enormous printing press. It manufactures U.S. currency. It dispenses trillions of dollars every year. According to Rice, much of that money will now be distributed on the basis of equity. That means it will go to people who do not possess, quote, privilege. So let's get very specific about what that means. What precisely is privilege? Can privilege be measured? If so, how exactly are we measuring it? Can we see the privilege formula? We should see it, because a huge amount turns on the definition of this word. Some Americans won't get jobs because it's been decided they have too much privilege. Others won't get into college or get promoted or win federal contracts. Others will see their neighborhoods change dramatically in ways they may not like because of their privilege.
Hold on,
They'll
pause.
tell you that's not true.
First off, the changing of their neighborhoods means that, I guess ostensibly, people who have less wealth may move in there. And so if you want a measure of what the privilege is there's at least a rough estimation.
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, seriously, recycling that argument that we've heard all the time about housing. So lazy and racist.
Regardless of what the Biden administration does, there are some Americans who will not get jobs. Regardless of what the Biden administration does, there are some Americans who will not get into colleges. This is not a question that you're denying Americans something. The question is like, how does the system help some people get stuff and prevent other people from not getting stuff? And this is it's the exact same thing with the notion of cancel culture. Cancel culture has always existed. It's been sometimes it had no name. In fact, it had no name when it was always the people who had no connections, no advantages, that could either be defined by money or by race, often both, or did not have an ideology that was the dominant ideology. This cancel culture has always existed. It's just that now it's named because who doesn't have access to certain things in society is become democratized.
And he says, just really quickly, that the Biden administration is making determinations on equity based on your privilege. And he's like, I'd like to see the formula. Has the Biden administration said that that's their determining factor? Someone's privilege specifically?
I'm sure Rice has said it maybe in a general term, or it's possible, but there's no statute, there's no executive order that's going to say the word privilege. It is going to create actually.
So at its outset, he's starting with a straw man. It's like that's all he can do.
And this is all in the context of, you look at maps of who's dying from COVID versus who's getting vaccinated for it.
Government, dude. Yeah. It's like government doing its job.
Continue.
See their neighborhoods change dramatically in ways they may not like because of their privilege. They'll tell you that's not true, but it is true. And before any of that happens, the rest of us deserve a clear explanation of what's going on. Who's getting rewarded, who's getting punished, and why? We don't have to ask politely. We're American citizens. This is our government, no matter who we voted for. We're paying for it. So we can demand an answer. But of course, there isn't an answer. That's the point. They can't really define privilege. They can't tell us who, in a country with no majority culture, actually qualifies as a, quote, minority. They don't want to have this conversation in the first place at all because their views are indefensible. That's why they're general rather than precise. That's why they're trying to make us be quiet.
I mean, you know, it is so obvious what this guy's doing. He has just gotten creepier and creepier. We're paying for it. Well, guess what? I mean, we're all paying for it, buddy. We're all American citizens. We're all paying for it.
Right-wing populism. That's what that is, right? The myth of it.
Yeah. Let's go to the IMs. Wow.
Good reminder, though, that
the White House is watching the GameStop situation.
Well, they just froze
Nokia?
a good amount of them, but I mean, now they're saying it's only inevitable when it pops, but who knows? I mean, I would not put it past the government to just freeze it.
Emma's just sitting there counting her cash.
I'm not, you know. I'm good. I put such a negligible amount.
I want stock tips every morning. Got to get some cash. I'm just looking around here. What can I sell?
I mean that hedge fund, the GameStop hedge fund. That thing's cool. That GameStop hedge fund, Melvin Capital, just filed for bankruptcy. Oh.
You win some, you lose some. Mark the Scientist. Hey, thanks for another great interview in the first half of the show. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on the cultural component of market fundamentalism worship amongst Republican voters. Seems to me rooted in some type of twisted belief in a theocratic natural order reminiscent of the physiocrats. Could you explain the rationalization the petty bourgeoisie used to justify their voting patterns? I'm not sure what their
physiocrats believed agriculture was a source of all wealth, like land. So
I think the natural order thing is it is absolutely correct, though. I mean, we use the example of Paul Ryan with that apocryphal story of the brown bag. But this is why, when Trump was running in 2015, why we felt that he had a very good chance of winning the Republican primary was because the Republicans have, for decades, maybe more, constructed a universe where people who are wealthy are morally righteous, and people who are not, I mean, at the very least, going back to Reagan and the welfare queens and this and that, people who are living in poverty have a moral deficiency. And I mean, you need to deploy this because otherwise it becomes really hard to justify as to why our society is so unequal. And
there's also kind of the Christian latent view that work is a moral.
There's a Puritan work ethic type of thing. Right. Absolutely. And there's also things like the prosperity gospel. But yes, I think the bottom line is fundamentalism is a mode of thought. And it is very easy to extrapolate from a theocratic fundamentalist worldview to a market fundamentalist worldview. I mean, even if you look at QAnon, a lot of those folks, very Christian, and the entire construct of the belief system is very Christian. Have faith, show up, they will reveal themselves. This is all religious terminology. Okajik, love you guys, but sorry, Elway owes his postseason success to Terrell Davis. Like Elway, my all-time favorite QB, Fran Tarkenton is not in the same league as Brady, number 1, or Montana, number 2.
I don't put Brady ahead. I think that's the top 3. I would put Brady at 2, And again, I know it's not a popular thing right now, but I genuinely think Rogers has always done more with less, and McCarthy was one of the most.
I don't think so.
Yeah, I that'll be my final sports question today, because I think the audience hates it.
I don't think they do, but
I think the audience, the part of the audience that I also love, might hate it. The other half.
Lionel Hutz. Did you see Mike Pompeo on Maria Bartiromo? He said the Chinese Communist Party so much I started playing a drinking game and I passed out early last night. Cody Pumpkin. Still have any plans to play the Kevin Sorbo Bernie movie trailer? Oh, yeah. What happened to that movie? Is it out? We got to check that out. Married to Mothra. Didn't they try to cancel Muhammad Ali? Without a doubt. Big time. Slapcoff. A broad question. Apart from lack of universal access, what glaring issues do you see in the education system that contribute to the current political climate and media landscape? Been thinking about this particularly regarding YouTube personality cults around IDW types like Peterson, or even the whole muddled force the vote debate. I don't know that there are glaring issues in our education system that contribute to this. I do think social media is problematic. I mean, I've been saying I think is the 2014 and 2015 that I felt like YouTube was there's a very underreported story in the danger of YouTube, and it's not just around, the radicalization. I just think that I'm not saying that we should, there shouldn't be YouTube shows, but I do think it's problematic. I do think the incentive structure for getting clicks is problematic. I mean, it's the same thing what I would have done with television news. I mean, it used to be back even pre-cable, I guess, and that your news division was a loss leader. You would lose money on your news. Simply a way of branding your channel. So you were completely incentivized to spend money on news, not worry about profits, so that you could be a trusted source. And if it were up to me, I would cap what kind of revenue you could own from your news. And if you're a bigger, and I wouldn't allow other corporations outside of television broadcasting to have ownership stakes. It's a real problem. Even on MSNBC, the idea that you have like the largest arms manufacturer has now not a majority share, but a significant minority share. It's a real problem that you have, I would resolve it with Comcast by just simply nationalizing the internet. But Disco Stew. Lindell is a leading governor candidate here in Minnesota. He's already been endorsed by the state party chair. He's a full-on lunatic. It's very obvious he would win a Republican primary here. Tucker is really making Goebbels blush with that level of propaganda. Imagine what he said, what that says about people who go on his show. Indeed. John Ossoff, Thirst Trap. Sam, I would highly recommend watching the video Dave Rubin Inauguration Day Coping. It's less than 4 minutes. My favorite part is him bragging about how Trump had fewer executive orders than Clinton, Bush, and Obama without realizing Trump was in there for 4 years, not 8 years. And Trump's orders per year was higher than those presidents.
I think I've watched that already.
Can we watch part of this? Can we pull some of that up?
I think there's music in it.
Oh, is that right? Oh. Series of tube worms. Tucker was frown blinking in the MyPillow coupon code in Morse code. Slappy tubs. I'm noticing a strange phenomenon here at work as a welder in Minnesota. I'm pretty much the only one who wears a mask at work. But lo and behold, after Biden was inaugurated, folks here started to wear masks. Guy asking me where to get a mask after 9 months of not giving a shit. Is it possible that what a president says matters, or is it because of the end of the constant drum of misinformation from the previous president? I think it's probably both. I was really looking forward to Mike Lindell running for governor of Minnesota. This whole Twitter ban is really going to put that to bed.
I also think Minnesota's recently just got smashed by a wave from both the Dakotas. So I think there might be a little bit more sensitivity to masks because of how dumb the Dakotas were about masks.
Interesting. Alec Hoffman, Twitter can control Mike Lindell. Who can't they control? How could a pillar of masculine strength like Mike Lindell be canceled? R.I.P. the Republic. Let's go to 312 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? (312). Been having some problems lately with the phone system. 312. All right, I'm going to try and get back to you. Calling from 208 area code.
Hey, Sam, this is Sean from Washington.
Sean from Washington, what's on your mind?
Well, I just wanted to give a little bit of update about Governor Inslee and the vaccine rollout being bungled here in Washington, specifically with regards to teachers.
Okay.
So Inslee, mentioned before, Inslee dramatically changed the reopening case requirements for schools to a point where now K through 5 elementary has no ceiling on cases, as in case numbers can never be too high for us to go back to in-person. So many districts are already moving in for elementary. And just yesterday, we had a press conference. Governor Inslee said that if you vaccinate a 25-year-old teacher, an older person doesn't get a dose. So every teacher that is vaccinated today means one less 80, 90, 100, 70, 65-year-old person gets the vaccine, end quote. He says we're currently getting about 116,000 doses a week of vaccines, and that, what's the word I'm looking, where's the end of the quote here? He says that it's a mathematical equation, which is why we can't vaccinate teachers, but in the same press conference, he says that now asking educators to return is not asking any more than we've asked for grocery clerks, and that schools are ready to open here in Washington. And a lot of people here in the state are running with that. People who are advocates of reopening schools quickly are running with that, saying, well, they're right. You know, grocery store clerks have been basically, thrown to the wolves this entire time, rather than what I would say, taking the position of, well, grocery stores should have unions like teachers do, and they should be able to advocate for themselves, and everybody lowering down to that denominator. It isn't necessarily a positive step. So it's just a continuation of the saga of how the anti-COVID warrior Inslee has been slowly reverting back to a much more conservative position on this reopening since his reelection, along with Superintendent Chris Rakedahl.
I am somewhat sympathetic to the plight of these governors because they're screwed, right? I've read so much on this as to how should you distribute the vaccine. From what I've read, that the more data that comes out, that if it's done properly, schools are not particularly dangerous in terms of infection. Okay. Now, with that said, I'm not sending my kid to school. She's staying at home. That partly is a function of her too, but. And I've read the key is get all the older people because their chances of dying if they catch it is higher, and so they should be first on the list. But the real problem is that you're only getting 130,000 doses. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the problem, right? Then the question is, okay, how do we deal with this? And I think that's just there's just not. We just don't have the expertise or the institutional knowledge to deal with this, or the capacity and the funding to deal with this, in a sort of a consistent and rational way. So, I mean, I have some sympathy for him. At the same time, it's also if I allow that, if I'm that charitable in terms of like the dilemma they're in, I think people also need to be equally as charitable in saying like, look, I mean, like I saw some piece by Matt Bai. God help me. I wish I had never had to say that guy's name again. In the Washington Post, basically saying like, it's about time that teachers, understand that they have a responsibility to society and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, dude, maybe you should preface this by saying, it's about time that we pay them like they're this integral to society. Like, Can
I add a little context to that?
Sure. Well, Matt Bai, you don't need to add, but for the audience.
Oh, not Matt Bai.
Oh, okay.
Not Matt Bai. So Washington's vaccine rollout has been unbelievably means tested. I used to teach and live in Idaho, where I spent most of my life, and they're currently vaccinating teachers at a rate over 3 times higher than what we're getting in Washington. And a lot of it is just a function of not having it so means tested. So Washington's thing is very, very convoluted. And just a couple of weeks ago, from union pressure, Inslee had a statement where the teachers were going to be all moved up into the same tier. So it's no longer going to be teachers are eligible over the age of 50. Now it's going to be just all teachers are available at that one point. And now that's being rolled back. So this actually marks sort of a departure from a previous accessibility extension.
For the life of me, I can't understand half the decisions that are made about any of this, to be honest with you. I mean, honestly, it's the bottom line is we just needed more vaccinations.
Right.
I mean, there's it's just completely incomprehensible. You know how much Pfizer's going to make over $1 trillion off of this, and I'm not convinced that so much of our problems are a function of just like how much profit people are insist on making. Because you can do stuff, but you just maybe can't do it as profitably.
Can I ask you a question as a parent and somebody on the complete other side of the country from me?
Yeah.
Is that there's a lot of things that teachers are discussing a lot, and I wonder what a parent would think about this. Is that there's sort of this idea that with remote learning, teachers are sort of just starting to get the hang of this. Obviously we didn't spend the summer preparing for it like we could have because we were still vacillating between whether we're going to go back or whether we're not when everybody really knew we're not. But teachers are sort of having this feeling that we're just starting to get the hang of this remote learning thing, and then now we're going to be forced into this extremely convoluted, complicated hybrid learning scenario that has its own set of risks and stressors for students and teachers. So what do you think about the idea that we should just let it ride for a while until vaccines, rather than adding in this entire complicated new system that we're all going to have adjustment time for?
I mean, I'll tell you that
with schedule management and stuff as a parent.
From close to day one, I basically, in my mind, and it wasn't just my decision because of the nature of my parenting, relationship, but in my mind, it's like this is just too unpredictable, and what I want is. There's going to be challenges no matter what. I want my kids to have consistency so that because whatever it is going to take them time to adjust. And if they can get into consistency. Now, with that said, I have the advantage in that that I can, I have access to a mechanism in which to provide childcare, when I'm working. And so that has to be.
Is that where Jamie is?
Huh? That's where Jamie is right now. No, Jamie's. That's what Jamie's doing. She's watching the kids. Yeah.
Red diaper babies.
Exactly. She's giving them training right now. Every time I come home, they're showing me like how you wash out your eyes from
you love to see it
from pepper spray and but the point being that for me consistency, particularly with the younger one, but my older one was just like she's not going to go. Her school has 4,500 kids. So she was just like, I'm not going.
Damn.
In fact, her school, what they do is, to the extent that any kids go in, they go in, but the teacher is beamed in, which I actually think is not a bad idea. For me, consistency at this point, because it's like, okay, you're going to go back into a hybrid situation. You're still subject to like, oh, there's a spike. This is becoming untenable. Like the kids who are going hybrid to my son's school, it's like, it feels like every 6 weeks they have to shut the school down for a week. And it's just so disruptive. It's harder, to even say to get childcare in that situation. And so for me, I would go for consistency. We're already in, close to February. I would go for consistency because a lot of people have already worked out things on some level. But I would go for consistency. And in fact, I would probably just if I was going to expend resources at this point, I would deploy, childcare for parents. Originally what I was interested in was you don't have middle school and high school kids go, and you take over the entire public school system for just the elementary kids who I think, need the in-person class more than anybody else. And you keep people spread out enough so that you can do this safely. I mean, the problem is not, in my mind, the concept of bringing at least, elementary school teachers into the classroom. The problem is that nobody could figure out a way of doing it properly and safely.
Right.
And even with that, you have some success at it in some places, but we just don't have the resources, the infrastructure, the pre-existing infrastructure to deal with a crisis like this. So I'm somewhat sympathetic on some level to governors.
You want there to be this set of best practices, or you want there to be experts somewhere that you can consult on this. And it's really a sort of a clarifying moment when you see that every administrator all the way up to the executives of states and the country are all dealing with this and getting the information at the same time as the classroom teachers and the students.
Yeah. And the problem is that, what should have happened is 9 months ago, the federal government should have set up a task force and said, okay, we're not going to be able to do this by June, but come September, we better have a plan that exists for a generic plan for every school in the country, and certain sort of benchmarks where we give you more resources to execute this plan. I mean, and you'd still have a lot of problems, but you'd have less. Appreciate the call, Sean. Thanks. I mean, it's just such a
lose-lose.
Yeah, and good for the Chicago Teachers Union for not going in, because I don't know to be honest with you, I don't know the details, but I would resent it if someone was forcing me into that situation without, these school systems are just more often than not are just not prepared to do this. And I would be very nervous about going into this scenario and have to rely on a system that is effed up. And, you can't sit there and say, teachers have a special responsibility. They've got to step up. And incidentally, good luck on your crappy pay. It's we're expecting, give teachers pension and pay and retirement benefits that you give cops, and you can expect them to function like cops. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. Emma?
Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you. Just needed to put a tag on that. GameStop billionaire. Anybody interested in joining me to pump the Orange Julius stock? That's the thing, is that what they're doing is they are essentially, this is it is fashioned on the old pump and dump schemes where they would go and buy a stock and this and that and entice other people to come in and buy, and then they would.
Can we just talk about it? Because
now let's play this clip.
Yeah,
let's play
Biden's
this clip
having to address it. This is
Yeah, this is and it's fun for, I think, your average American, for the reason that A, the vast majority of Americans don't own any significant amount of stock. B, the people who are really getting screwed are the hedge funders who who their involvement, I'm not convinced anybody's involvement in stocks, frankly, has any sort of material benefit to anybody except for the sort of like board of directors and maybe some shareholders, which is a limited number of Americans. Like, the concept of like, you sell your stocks and that's how we build companies and we give them cash reserves.
Some of the statistics are crazy. Like 90% of stocks are owned by 10% of them. It's
80% of stocks are owned by 20% of the people, and the rest of that 20% is owned by 50% of Americans don't own any stock. And I think the rest of the people who own part of that 20%, it's generally in the form of pensions.
And that includes, the half that doesn't have any stake in the stock market. They just don't have 401ks. They don't have any of that.
Right.
So it's very elite.
And one of the things that we can see is that it's completely divorced now from the lived experience of the economy by the American public. We have 900,000, give or take, new unemployment claims every week, and the stock market just functions as if it's like in a completely parallel universe where none of that is happening. But it's fun to watch hedge funders who are making a killing on this stuff get beat at their own game. They're basically the hedge funders more or less are betting that a certain stock is going to go lower and lower in value. GameStop, of course, it's just not. First of all, people aren't going to a store anymore to buy their games when they can get it online because they want to be a little bit safer. But it's also, there's a myriad of ways to get your games. So GameStop was going down, and
AMC, Nokia, BlackBerry. These are the ones that are
and
now
these hedge funders are just going to bet that in 2 weeks, in a month, or 6 months, I'm going to be able to deliver that stock to you at a lower price than it's going for now. And so they bet, they make that bet essentially. And a bunch of people came in and said that we're going to screw with their bet and we're going to buy up this stock. It's going to start to go up, and then these hedge funders are going to have to basically buy our stock.
Buy it from us to protect their massive amount of investment because they have the means to buy all of those shorts. And so that's what's amazing and democratizing about it.
Here's Andrew Ross Sorkin explaining.
Brendan's saying that might not be as relevant now, because it's just now a little outdated. He just said in the chat, Sorkin clip.
Oh, it's that the Melvin Group is now filing for bankruptcy. In this clip, he says that they're not going to do that. Well, then it does make sense, I guess.
What's that? Yeah. Okay. Well, here's Andrew Ross Sorkin saying everything's going to be fine for the Melvin Group. They have announced that they're bankrupt. But here he is. This was him yesterday. No, this morning, right? This is how fast this thing's moving. Go ahead.
We have some breaking news right now on what has turned into the soap opera and saga of the markets right now, and that is the story of GameStop. The news to bring you right now is that Melvin Capital Management, this is the hedge fund that had shorted this company, that had effectively been attacked by an army of investors trying to push up and press up the stock of GameStop along the way. Melvin Capital is now out of the stock. They got out of the stock, from what I understand, yesterday afternoon. I just got off the telephone with Gabriel Plotkin, who runs that firm. They've taken a rather huge loss. I do not have the full number on what that loss looked like. As was reported yesterday, both Citadel and Point72 have infused something on the order of close to $3 billion into Melvin Capital to try to shore up its finances. And Gabe Plotkin telling me just moments ago that the speculation that the firm would file for bankruptcy is false. There's some reporting taking place on Reddit where so much of this discussion.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out he was wrong. We have an updated clip too, right? Let's play this. Do we have an updated one?
So now that they have filed for bankruptcy, this is one of the more progressive, like renegade investors. It's really hard to pronounce his name, but he's gone viral a few times for his appearances on CNBC talking about inequity in the markets and like how at the start of the pandemic, he said giving cash to people, that's the way to jumpstart the economy. Talking about this phenomenon.
Next guest, he tweeted on Tuesday that he'd gone long through call options. Chamath Palihapitiya is the CEO of Social Capital. He joins us now on the phone. Chamath, thank you for being here.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. So you tweeted yesterday that you bought $115 calls in GameStop. Can you tell me what your position is as of this very moment?
Yeah. Can I tell you a little story before all of that, or no?
Why don't you tell me that first, and then we'll go from there.
So this morning I woke up after spending all last night in Wall Street bets, reading about all of this stuff. I ended up closing up my position this morning, and I wanted to announce that I'm taking all the profits that I made, plus my original position. So I'm going to take $500,000. And I'm going to donate to the Barstool Fund for small businesses. But I really want to tell you, beyond the $500,000 donation or the money that I invested, which was, not a huge amount in the grand scheme of that stock or the entire market, what I learned, because I think what I learned over the last couple of days is important for everybody that's watching CNBC.
And that is?
I think that what you're seeing is essentially a pushback against the establishment in a really important way. You have a lot of people, and I would encourage anybody who is dismissive of this thing to go into Wall Street Bets and actually just read the forums. And I think that you're going to see three kinds of posts. The first kind of content are a lot of people doing some incredible fundamental diligence on companies, trying to think about long-term value. And in my opinion, many of them are doing as good and, frankly, a better job than a lot of hedge fund analysts that I work with. That's number one. The second are a lot of people who believe that, coming out of 2008, what happened was Wall Street took an enormous amount of risk, and they left retail as the bag holder. And a lot of these kids were in grade school and high school when that happened. They lost their homes. Their parents lost their jobs. And they've always wondered, why did those folks get bailed out for taking enormous amounts of risk and nobody helped and showed up to help my family? And then the third thing is a realization that instead of having idea dinners or, quiet whispered conversations amongst hedge funds in the Hamptons, these kids have the courage to do it transparently in a forum. And I'm not saying all of it is perfect by any means. But I think it takes an enormous amount of faith in the system to be that transparent, to talk about things, and then for each individual to make their own mind up and to do things, whether it's to buy and to sell.
I mean, that's...
I just think it's important because that perspective is never, ever uttered on CNBC. It's treated like a massive casino, and the material consequences of what people went through in 2008, that's what informs this. I mean, all these kids are young people on Reddit. Some of them work in Wall Street, right? But some of them are just regular Joes who just see that, have zero qualms about doing this, about gutting hedge funds, because they shouldn't.
If you go back, certainly, you can find a lot of this in the early days of this particular iteration of the show. Interviews with people. I mean, Dan wrote a book about this, Chain of Title, but we spoke to Borofsky. I mean, we did many interviews on how they saved the banks, how Barack Obama had an opportunity. There's a story that was told by Barney Frank. I can't remember exactly where it appears, but it's not hard to find, I think, in retrospect. That Paulson, who was at the time the Treasury Secretary, or was it the Fed? He was at the Fed, I believe. I can't remember. I can't remember if Paulson was the Treasury Secretary or at the Fed. This, 10 years, my brain is mush now. But when Barack Obama was the the president-elect, there was a proposal. I think it was Barney Frank was looking to. There's two ways you could do this, right? You could go and you could make sure that the banks are made whole or they're backstopped. You had all of these loans that they had securitized, and the loans turned out to be garbage because the real estate values dropped. Many of these houses had loans that could not be supported, that were too big for the value of the underlying asset, which was the home. And there's two ways that you could have done this. You could have, one, given monies to the homeowners and said, here's money to go pay off the banks. Or you could have done that by also saying, like, okay, instead of actually here's money to go pay off the banks, it's like we are cramming down your interest, or we're cramming down your principal, and we will make the banks whole, but you're going to get credit for it. We're going to pay the banks for you, but it's going to be basically passed through you so that you get credit for it. You could have done that in a couple of different ways, but the bottom line being they owe less, and their house, the principal that they borrowed was not on their ledgers, was not a liability for the homeowner. And they would make the bank whole. Or you could just go and backstop the bank and say to the banks, hey, now that we've got you covered, please let these homeowners off the hook. And they did the latter because ostensibly they didn't want to train homeowners into thinking, or consumers or people or citizens, that like, hey, we will backstop you if your debts are bad. But they had no problem backstopping the banks. So in other words, they were worried about the moral hazard on the borrowers. They weren't worried about the moral hazard on the lenders. And if you are a bank loan officer, you have a fiduciary responsibility. That's why they have bank regulators to assess bank loans. And the reason why, you get certain backstops and why you get interest on these loans is because you're taking a risk and you may go under. And the Obama administration basically set it up to pay off the banks. We ended up having millions of foreclosures in this country. And so much of the anger and resentment comes out of that because it's one house forecloses. Somebody drops the keys there or walks away, or they foreclose or whatnot. You destroy whole neighborhoods. And you destroy a whole neighborhood, you start destroying whole communities. And in many respects, we're still sort of seeing the blowback from that.
Yeah. I think the point about how this is people in my generation coming to collect, I guess, from Wall Street greed and retaliating in an online way via Reddit in ways that traditional banking executives and hedge fund guys who make these massive decisions that affect the economy in closed rooms and in hushed whispers in a way that they don't understand. And I think that's what's so thrilling about it too. And the narcissism and the sociopathy with which a lot of these Wall Street people have just moved past the effects of the economic collapse that you're discussing. That's what caused them to underestimate this and now that they're outraged that regular people are now treating our play money like a casino, like we've been doing for decades and decades. Yeah, the anger is so real, right? Yeah, mods.
Yeah, here's a drill tweet. Mods, one of those obscene low follower count boys stole a lick from the delicious lolly that father bought me. Ah, how dreadful.
And then I also saw a meme where it was Snape saying, how dare you use your own spells against me, Potter? And that's what Wall Street is right now. Like, that's exactly what this is. And I still, from the primary, I went to an Elizabeth Warren rally and I was asking why this young guy, why he was for Warren as opposed to Sanders. And basically he said, my family lost my home and she was on the front lines there. I voted for Bernie in the primary, right? But that was one of the moments like that showed me in a mosaic of many that, like, people were making specific decisions, political decisions of my generation, based on the trauma of the economic collapse, and it's constantly underestimated. And that's what's so glorious about what's happening today with GameStop and all the other driving up of these stock prices based on these democratic forums. I tweeted this, like, we're getting more accountability from Wall Street based on Reddit than we've gotten in decades from the federal government.
There is a quality of sort of like that old Western, right, where, you know, the father's killed in front of the son.
Yeah.
And he goes and
it's very
goes away
Tarantino.
for 10, 15 years. Well,
it predates. I know, echoing it, but whatever. I thought about Kill Bill. That was my first
right.
thing.
But I mean, it's an almost archetypal story, you know. And then Batman. I mean, on some level, right? I mean, it's
and they're doing it in the cloak of, instead of having a dark suit in the cloak of night, they're doing it on
Reddit.
On Reddit,
yeah.
It's awesome.
They go into the desert and start to train, and then they come back and they take.
And the Biden administration just got asked about this. Like, they're looking into it. I mean, it's crazy.
Jimmy Dore Gerbil Herder. Hey, hi, Emma. Do you think Jimmy Dore looks like Colin Cowherd? Glad to hear you finally retracted your earlier statement about the My Pillow guy dating Jenna from 30 Rock. As it turns out, he didn't date anyone from 30 Rock. He was just looking for a 30 Rock.
Well, apparently, like, she had a really funny, it was in the Daily Mail, it blew up, and then she was like, I've never met this person.
That's so strange. How did that, who?
I know. And then what was the first part of the question?
Do you think Jimmy Dore looks like Colin Cowherd?
No, but they do.
Similar energy.
Similar energy of right. Attention seeking.
Wet Hot American Cedar he sells pillows. The new I paint houses. Robin Reno. Imagine your team just won the World Series in a close one, and you're 10 games into the new season, and you're winning. You're up 1/3, and you have the runners on first and second. Your strategy batter is up, and base hit to center will put you in a position for your hitters later. 2 spectators in the stands start screaming to swing for the fences. You're a fraud, coward, swing for the fences. You hit a double and bring in 2 and win the game later. The spectators scream for 2 months how you hate baseball and ruined your chances. I'm not sure I follow. Lyle Cook, CNBC, market manipulation. What's up with that? Okay. Did Wall Street Bets do a poor man's pump and dump and gamed a hedge fund? Yes, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I saw, and you go on Wall Street Bets too, and you read, like, I was able to pay my mom some money for her house. I was able to pay for this healthcare treatment. Like, yeah, overall, the overarching goal is that this kind of casino-like atmosphere for Wall Street should be eliminated altogether. But in the short term, it's immensely glorious to watch this go down.
Thousand Flowers. Just watched your Jimmy Dore debate from 2016. Crazy how literally every prediction you made was true. Get a second job as a psychic. It was not. You didn't need to be a psychic to see a lot of that stuff, frankly. Iced Team Fur. The concept of jaywalking is not legitimate. Alex485. All the anger about the GameStop short squeeze is basically people saying, hold on, but you people are allowed to do that. I mean, basically a short sale should be the riskiest type of bet when they are getting caught on it, but really we know the house always wins. Also funny that the only way Robinhood works is that it allows people to trade for free because it shows hedge funds the incoming trades milliseconds before they are made. Right. They sell that info. So it's hedge funds getting screwed over by the insider info. They're being sold.
Yeah. I mean, it's mostly Robinhood, but like E-Trade doesn't do that, I think, right? Like,
I don't know. I don't follow this stuff that well, to be honest with you.
Surveillance capitalism.
Yeah.
See, the insurrection. The insurrection erection. Sam's dab made me cringe almost as much as a Babylon Bee headline. Can't wait.
You gotta do that, right? Like you just went this.
Now there's video of Emma dabbing. So
sometimes I just forget I'm on camera. Damn it. It wasn't like emphatic enough to be a real one. It was like a dress rehearsal.
Can't wait for Emma's new show, Stocks, Jocks, and Deficit Hawks. Moon in the Lake. Can anyone really be sending kids to school when there's been so few vaccinations? The new strains are more virulent. BlackBerry still exists? Disinformation on Reddit? Really? Well, I don't think it's disinformation on Reddit.
No, they're
the information seems pretty good. Onward Christian Soldiers. Do you have an Amazon affiliate link? No, we got rid of that a long time ago. Also want to urge a guest with knowledge of the Weimar era in Germany, as we may be in that interregnum ourselves and Biden may be our Hindenburg. I recommend Sir Richard Evans. Bingo Mosquito. Not saying it's a bad thing, but this is a fun new dynamic. Sam, knock knock. Me, who's there? Sam, boo. Emma, is someone about to cry?
I don't get it.
I don't get it either. Trumpy Bear. Some state governments make teachers sign a contract refusing them the right to participate in BDS. I wonder how Tucker would defend that. Oh, yeah. There's that was that case out of Texas at the very least I know of.
Yeah, I would recommend looking at the Daily Caller's coverage of BDS because you won't find Tucker ever mentioning it, but the Daily Caller is certainly very opposed to BDS.
Cancel culture. Calling from a 501 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello?
Hi, ma'am.
Excuse me?
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
Hi.
Hello?
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 Hi, ma'am.
I'm going to sue you.
Hello?
I'll sue.
Hello? Hello?
Hello?
Hello? Hi.
Calling from a 224 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Joey from Chicago.
Joey from Chicago. What's on your mind?
Hey, just real quick, wanted to give a quick shout out to the teachers union because, as a parent who's absolutely sick of remote learning and in the fall who was very excited about the prospect of, going into a hybrid situation in February. This is, of course, before December. When December hit, we saw like the worst cases of deaths all year, and January is looking to be even worse. I think it's absolute insanity to force these teachers back in school. So happy to continue to do remote learning for a while. My question to you was about means testing and taxes. So I may be a little bit ignorant about this. This may be a discussion that's gone on, and there's very good reason why nobody talks about it. How come we're not hearing more about retroactive means testing? I'm not against means testing myself, but I'm against it in terms of, making the window so narrow for relief that, you have to be starving on the street before you get it, or taking so much time that you don't actually get anything to anybody. Why don't we hear politicians talking about getting as many checks to as many people as possible for relief stimulus, and then having that kind of means testing be retroactively enacted when you pay your taxes for the year? So if you make more than $150,000 a year, you pay a percentage of that back. That's my question.
Okay, so what you're saying is, in principle, I agree with you. The concept that you're talking about is, but you're saying make the government payments taxable if your income is over a certain amount.
That's right. So instead of having all this like going back and forth with Mitch McConnell about who gets it, who doesn't, get as many checks as possible to as many people right away, and say, we're going to do means testing when you're doing your 2020 tax.
As a policy, as a policy prescription, I agree with you. That's basically what we should be doing. That's when people say like we should means test Medicare or we should means test Social Security. We do means test it. We means test it because it's taxable, and we can even be even more means testing on it. We just do that through the taxation because it's easier, it's cheaper. You're not having to create a bureaucracy to do a means test on a program. You can just get it on the back end when people are already having to fill out their taxes.
That's right.
I in principle, I agree with you. I guess
I'm just surprised that I don't see that.
Well, because then you're getting into an argument with like, we've got to raise taxes. Like just like politically, the understanding that people have of this stuff is more is difficult. The question is like, what's the quickest political way to get the money out to people? And I mean, that's what, in my estimation, should be the thing. Like, I to be honest with you, if they were to go, you know, and I don't know, there's some study in the Post or somebody wrote something today about like, you know, it's limiting the checks to people only getting, you know, making $75,000 a year is, you know, more efficient. I mean, that sounds reasonable to me. I don't know if that's the case or not. Frankly, I don't know what the savings would be in terms of the bill. I mean, but if we were to save $200 billion, my preference would be to plow that money into unemployment, you know, because there are definitely people who are doing fine through this, particularly, you know, like, you know, I think there was an initial shock that was probably more universal in the first couple of months of the pandemic. But then people, you know, figured out a lot of people can work from home. Those people maybe are doing fine. They're probably, you know, banking some money and this and that. I would rather see it going to like folks who are unemployed. And, you know, if you were to impose that, let me put it this way. When Biden said, I mean, I would prefer it to be 2,000. But when Biden said, I am open to negotiations on who qualifies for that $1,400, I'm not as concerned with it, particularly if that money gets redeployed somewhere else. I don't think it will get redeployed somewhere else. But yes, broadly speaking, yeah, we should, if you're worried about, like whenever anybody brings up means testing for social insurance, we have a mechanism to do that already, and it's called progressive taxation. And we can means test everything by taxation. Same impact, same effect, cheaper, much cheaper to do for government. If you want a lean government, the way to do it is instead of creating an apparatus saying, do you deserve this? You just, when you fill out your taxes, you tell us how much money you had, and we tell you what your tax rate is. That's it. Appreciate the call.
All right. Thank you.
I mean, and that could apply to student debt relief. You're worried that you're going to be paying off the debts of doctors and lawyers who are making millions and this and that. Fine. Pay $50,000. Forgive that debt. Let's raise taxes on people who are making over $200,000 a year or whatever it is. That's the way you do it. It's the most efficient way. If you're worried about saving money and you're worried about fairness, you have the means, and all it is you just change the number in a system that already exists. Most efficient way to do it. Calling from a 224 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? 224. 224. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Let's try, go back to 312. 312. 312? Nope. Nope, nothing. All right, let's try one more. Calling from a 774 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Carl from Worcester.
Carl from Worcester?
From Worcester.
Worcester, Mass?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Nice. How's the Woe Sox doing, dude?
I haven't been to a game yet, but I plan on going soon.
Wait, have they been having games?
No.
January.
I was going to say, like, wait, what?
He means soon, like eventually.
Oh, like in April, maybe.
Yeah.
All right.
Like, yeah.
How's Pola Stadium? Is it looking good?
I think it was pretty good. It's better than the usual, I would say.
Yeah. Well, that's a low bar, bud. All right, go ahead. What do you got?
I was gonna say it's Worcester. But anyways, what I was going to say is, so I think a big part of the problem for the left right now is a lack of organization. So I'm just wondering, like, what you view as a path towards, like, becoming a more cohesive bloc, so these bigger things that we want to get accomplished can get accomplished. Like, is it just DSA, do you think, or like, do you have a different view of it? I'm just curious what your opinion on that is.
I would say two things. I would say that there's a lot of, there's more organizing. I'm going to let you go, Dick. I appreciate it. There is more organizing going on than you would get a sense of on online. I mean, look, I'm not an organizer. I have a narrow skill, arguable as to whether I even have a significant amount of that skill. But to the extent that I do have a skill, it's narrow, and I deploy it in that way. There are organizers. I mean, we're, planning on having Joshua Kahn Russell on again soon. We're looking to get the nurses who had, or part of the Coalition of Healthcare Now that met over the past weekend. I mean, they didn't, virtually met. They have a strategy. A lot of this is going to happen on a state level. There's a lot of evidence that some of these bigger societal changes, marriage equality, there are others, suffragette, women's suffrage, come via state-by-state level. And when a certain number of states adopt something, then all of a sudden it becomes national. You get New York, you get Chicago, you get California to go, let's say, single payer, for instance. So a lot of organizing, I think, is going to be more localized in that way, but we'll bring on some organizers. I think the online left feels pretty uncohesive, and it probably is at the moment. I think to a certain extent there's like...
Well, the left lost. So some people are living in that reality and others aren't.
I think there's some truth to that as well. There's definitive truth that we lost.
We lost. And it wasn't 2016. This was different. This was a returned, like, people wanted a warm, cozy blanket. They wanted someone who could defeat Trump, too. And, like, leftism didn't beat that out. I mean, I don't see it as rigged in the same way as in 2016. And so that's, I think, harder for people to swallow. But that was the after effect of Trumpism. So when you have Jimmy Dore saying, right, like that Trump would have created the conditions that would allow the left to thrive, in some cases that's true. We have the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, we had, Rashida Tlaib, Jamal Bowman, they became congresspeople, which, coincidentally he now thinks they're sellouts. But in other instances, it caused people to retreat back to what they felt comfortable with. And so the left is like, wow, this is incoherent. We were united behind the idea that Bernie would have won in 2016, which I think is true. It's more complex now. There's a lot of dynamics that Trump created, and so you've got to approach things with some care. And so I think the online left, like, there aren't any simple answers right now, and so that's causing a lot of what we're seeing.
And part of it is also, it's like, we have like there's just a weird dynamic and some perverse incentives. And, I don't think anybody who's listened to this program for any amount of time, never mind the 10 years that we've been around doing this iteration, or, 6 years before that, had any confusion about like where we would be in terms of criticizing Biden and pushing Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. And I think there are people who are in this space and really need to differentiate themselves. And so, where it's involving like, starting to eat ourselves because, that's what the kind of space that you need. So, I mean, look, AOC, Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush. You can go Pramila Jayapal. I mean, on and on. These people are not radicals, definitionally. Well, not definitionally, but pretty close. If you're running for elected office, you're not a radical. And but there is no doubt that within the context of American politics and American elected officials, they represent, to the extent that they have any power, they represent the most power that the left has within the electoral system. I have perfect respect for people who have a disposition of like, I don't focus on electoral politics. I show up, I vote because it takes me a half an hour once every 4 years or once every 2 years. And then I focus on other activities, some of which may benefit those elected officials and some of their agendas and some which may not. I mean, I have more than respect for that. I encourage it.
It's doing work. Exactly.
Work. I mean, and, you know, what we try and do here is to make things a little bit less complicated and so that people can see the various agendas that are at play and what is possible within the context of this, you know, of like our political system. And
but not too uncomplicated.
Well, I mean, try and make it as simple, you know, and create these dynamics, but that doesn't mean that it's, you know, black and white. And, you know, you can make things a little bit more clear and still understand that, like, there's some nuance to it. But there are people out there who I think and it's not a question of demanding of your politicians, but it's also just sort of like assessing, you know, what are your assets? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And you don't overplay your hand because you don't want to lose. You want to win. And winning with like with self-satisfaction, losing with self-satisfaction is worthless. It may be fine for you personally, but it's worthless as a political agenda. And it does nothing. It does nothing. And
you're wrong. It actually gets more YouTube views for you.
Well, like I say, for you individually, it very well may be lucrative and it's self-satisfying. But as a political measure, it doesn't. I mean, look, it's very hard for me to get into the head of other people as to why they do certain things. And I have a feeling like, you know, in some of those heads, it would be rather disturbing to be there. And it wouldn't just be as simple as like, I just want to make cash. I think there's probably other, you know, things.
Attention addiction, internet addiction, lots of.
Who knows?
Lots of what we're seeing.
Who knows? But the bottom line is that like, in a world where there is no value in investing anything in the most progressive members of the House and supporting them and pushing them too. But you got to do it with support. But undercutting them, in that world, you should not be participating in electoral politics.
Yeah, defining them as the obstacles to progress. I mean, yeah, I think an alternative point of view is that the one thing holding the left back is the media fence sitters, and we just need to identify all of them. So good luck to all those who are on that project.
Right. I mean, that's just absurd. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just absurd. Like the idea that in any way I could do a 24-hour a day stream saying don't support this or that, and the idea that that is going to be the fatal blow to it, then I got news for you. It's pretty weak to start with.
Conflation of like personal media rivalries or narratives with politics. It's pretty sad.
All right. Let's try this one more time. 312 area code. 312. I did my best. All right, final call of the day, calling from a 478. A lot of people hanging on for over an hour. I apologize. This is one of them. Calling from a 478 area code. Who's this?
Good afternoon, Sam. This is Jeff in Georgia.
Jeff in Georgia. How are you, sir? How's your health?
My health is quite good, thank you. No real complaints. Don't even need to worry about old Jeff in Georgia. Do I sound okay? I'm on a headset that I bought basically for you, buddy.
It's a little staticky.
I didn't want to say anything after you said that you bought it just for us.
Oh, no.
Wait, now it's looking a little
hang
better.
on.
I think it's an improvement, honestly.
Yeah.
It kind of removes some of your twang, though, I gotta say.
Is this better or
Oh,
worse?
that's better.
Okay, we'll go with this, and I'll try not to move. Sam, it's a pleasure to speak with you, Sam, Matt, Emma, Brendan, everyone. Great to talk to you. I really enjoyed your interview, and I know it's been a while since that interview, sort of, but I kind of want to go back to it because I particularly enjoyed your exchange on capitalism. I love questions like this. What is capitalism? And I know this perspective is a little bit maybe like Yankified, maybe Americanized, right? But, to me, the best way to think about it, and maybe people can latch onto this sort of language, is that anything that you need, anything that you use in your day, in your life, all of it, we don't make it, we don't produce it in order for you to use it, in order for your benefit to be extracted from it for you. This goes for cars, houses, shoes, clothes, electricity, everything there is, more or less in America. We don't make those things for you to use. We don't make clothes for you to wear. We make clothes for you to buy. And by we, I mean humans in a global capitalist system. And this creates, a whole lot of problems. And, they will tell you that the market, capitalist boosters, that is, that they market us how we allocate this, how we solve this problem of who gets all the shoes, clothes, cars, and whatnot. And there is no other way, and that it is your duty to conform to it. And part of what class consciousness and socialism means to me is realizing that ain't none of that is true. And in fact, particularly in America, we have it very easy. There are a lot of countries that have already made huge strides towards decommodifying things like electricity, transportation, infrastructure, healthcare, drugs, both through direct production and through just, buying the stuff and controlling it, yes, through market mechanisms, but, we have to start somewhere. I love this sort of thing. I really do. Because I think people realize, especially with this GameStop stuff, just how much of this is really in the ether, how much of it isn't real, how much it really doesn't reflect anything that they're ever going to hold, touch, or be able to use, right? Like, none of that stuff is real to them. Just like these numbers on a fucking stock trade, they're in the ether. None of this really represents the value of GameStop, and there is a better way to do things. People, there really is. And to me, that better way is socialism. We'll have to grasp towards it sort of like blind, I guess, and deaf, but we have to do our best because at this point, this endless quest to commodify and extract profit in this manner will make the planet a desert. I don't know if people know this, but, we've mapped the whole thing. There are no new markets to open up. There's no hidden resource cache somewhere that we're going to stumble upon that's going to keep us going. It's not going to happen. We don't have a choice. Sorry, I've gone on plenty long, Sam.
No, it was good.
For your time.
No, I appreciate it. Apparently, you don't have faith in Elon Musk to figure it out for us, Jeff, in terms of those resources, but that's okay. I think that that's one of the things in Mike's book is, in fact, I think the first reason that he cites for freedom from markets being essential to actually being free is that, as the markets don't provide, distribute basic necessities. And then the second one is they don't do it efficiently. The markets don't deploy these things efficiently in terms of where they're needed for use. They deploy them based upon where they can be purchased. And what will get purchased. I mean, there's a lot of products that people don't seem to realize that we don't have simply because it wasn't profitable for someone to make it. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's people are going to take the sure bets. I mean, like the vaccine can be very, very telling in terms of how much government subsidies had to go involved into the development of these vaccines so quickly.
I am particularly looking for some follow-up on stuff I read about Oxford.
Yeah.
Everything's a whirlwind these days, but they originally promised months ago
to make it open source.
To surprise a lot of people, that they were going to basically give this thing away in order to make it low or zero cost for as many people as they possibly could. And then a few months went by, and somebody whispered in their ear. I have read it was primarily the Bill and Melinda Gates.
Yeah, I saw that too. I don't know. I haven't seen that
know
story.
Any details on that.
Yes,
I would love
Same.
to know more about that sort of thing. But this happens in pharmaceuticals. It happens in simple things with math, which there is no reason why we can't have free N95 masks distributed to everyone by now. If we really wanted to as a country. It's been months and months and months. They're not that hard to make. We've been making them for years. It's easy. They're pretty cheap. And we have everyone's address already because we have something called the post office. Like, this is all really doable, especially given the amount of time that's passed. We haven't just do anything.
Yep.
There's no money in that for anybody to make. I have a podcast that exists. It's the Distant Peasant Podcast. Who should listen to it if they want to? It's pretty good.
Dissident Peasant, folks. Check it out.
That's
Jeff,
a good name.
You guys have a great week.
Thanks for the call. All right, folks, that's it for us today on the phones. Going to read a couple more IMs, and then we're going to get out of here. We've gone late. Pinko, we are being censored. It's like George Orman's 1987. Pizza Grillo, in light of the discussion of the online Boogaloo Boys as allies of the left, I think it would be very helpful if MR could have a guest segment setting the record straight about what this group actually stands for and why they are not allies to the left. We could probably work something like that out. Cuddly Cudlow. Guess we're all forgetting what kind of hat Brady was wearing during the last administration. Coach McGurk.
I don't forget.
How do I convert my 401k to MoviePass stock? Seems like a good move right now. Left is best. Left. Oh, tis bets. Okay.
As somebody who was a GameStop member back 15, 20 years ago, I totally get it's sad, but the sort of mall nostalgia of that place is sort of important to your community.
Degradation of humanities in favor of useful job skills in response to the I am question. English teacher who is not supposed to teach close reading, critical thinking. 100% sure. Militant apathy. It's a goat F. My kid's school system had 2 teachers die in a week. Oy. South Dakota Progressive. For more on how cancel culture has always existed, folks should check out the interview Michael did with Noam Chomsky on TMBS. If memory serves, Chomsky described how an entire publishing company was shut down to prevent one of his books from being published. I don't suppose Tucker will have Chomsky on to talk about that. I would doubt that as well. What is that you're sending?
It's just something. It's related to the GameStop thing, but we can talk about it later if we want.
And depressed Canadian, Patton Oswalt, Dana Gould, Andy Richter, Sam Seder named 4 comedians who have had a public falling out with Jimmy Dore. Well, I think there's more than that, to be honest with you. Andy Kindler's not terribly happy with him either. Steve from Kansas City. Hey, Sam, the top post on Reddit right now is a screenshot of a tweet that Sagar himself posted to Wall Street Bets about his segment on Rising. He's trying to rope this stock market stunt into his fake right-wing populism.
Yeah,
they're smart. They're good at marketing. And two more. Jude from Connecticut, holdover comment from the other day. Never let Gray or Dorr or anyone else suggest Dorr is just trying to tough love towards J Dems and nothing more. They take super chats from viewers diverting money from Nina Turner's campaign, and then they applaud viewers when they do it. The bad cop line is bullshit. And the final IM of the day, Neff. FYI, important E-Trade is Cantor Fitzgerald, i.e. just another Wall Street firm, not an independent company. Okay, folks, see you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bulb. But finding out won't make me feel any better.